Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 122. With our book today, written by an author who epitomizes the idea, the concept, the genre of high science fiction. His writing in the mid-20th century set the gold standard for how literature and genre could overlap each other, and how a genre of writing could transform from being mere quote-unquote kid stuff to being something approaching high art. By the way, along the way through transforming a genre, he also wrote screenplays, poems, and many, many other works. Along with Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, and the ever cigarette-smoking rebel writer Philip K. Dick, this writer's works will be read long after the genre of science fiction transmutes, as it is doing in our own time and before our very eyes, into the reality of science fact. Through the alchemy of imagination, deep in the recesses of engineering minds. I almost read like a sentence this author might write. Today on the podcast, to kick off our late summer and early fall tour of the genre of science fiction, we will be studying and addressing for leaders the themes inherent in Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. We'll be joined on this march into the literary fire, such as it were, with our returning guest host for episode number 98, where we cover True Grit by Charles Portis, John Hill, aka Small Mountain. How you doing, John? Welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, man. I am so excited to talk about this book, and because I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but you put out the list of books you wanted to cover, and I said I want to do this one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right, and we're going to talk about why here in a little bit, because I'm just excited to be back.
It is a book that I have read probably at least 2 or 3 times in my life, and reading it now, the stage of life that I'm at, with all of the current shenanigans we have going on in the world, in the West in general, and in the United States in particular. And when we're recording this, we are coming off of a second set of gunshots fired at a presidential candidate. We are living in perilous times. And while I am a person who believes that we will come out of it on the other side, I do believe that coming out of it on the other side of it is going to be a close run thing. And this book is about, at least in my mind, this book is about what happens if you don't come out on the other side of it. So we're going to start with Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Now, the version that I have is the Simon & Schuster version, published, back in probably 1995. And while normally I don't read directly from copywritten books on the podcast, particularly ones like this, I don't think Ray Bradbury's estate would have a problem with this, actually. I think they would want people to read this book out loud. So from Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, Chapter 1, The Hearth and the Salamander. I'm going to open up quickly. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon wing books died on the porch and lawn of the house. While the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Montag grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse, he might wink at himself, a minstrel man, burnt corked in the mirror. Later, going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile, still gripped by his face muscles in the dark. It never went away, that smile. It never ever went away, as long as he remembered. And that's how we open Fahrenheit 451, the temperature, by the way, at which books burn. As usual, we are going to talk right away. We're going to delve right away into the literary life of Ray Bradbury, because this guy was a hell of a guy who was actually born, and you can tell this by reading his biography on Wikipedia. He was born at exactly the right place at exactly the right time in exactly the right century to be a writer. And I would not call that luck. I would call that providence. He was born to, well, write the things that he wrote, and he turned his talents to exactly where they needed to be. Ray Douglas Bradbury, born August 22nd, 1920, died June 5th, 2012, was born in Waukegan, Illinois, to Esther Bradbury, a Swedish immigrant, and Leonard Spalding Bradbury, a power and telephone lineman of English ancestry. Bradbury attended Los Angeles High School after his parents moved around a bit and was active there in the drama club. He often roller skated through Hollywood in hopes of meeting celebrities. Among the creative people he met while roller skating through Hollywood were special effects pioneer Ray Harryhausen and radio star George Burns. Bradbury's first pay as a writer at age 14 was for a joke he sold to George Burns to use on the Burns and Allen radio show. And I'm a big fan, by the way, just as a pause, of old time radio. That's one of the things I very rarely talk about, but I will listen to old time radio shows. And the Burns and Allen show was a really good one. The Charlie McCarthy show was a really good one back in the day. People forget that drama, comedy, detective stories, science fiction, film noir, radio was the first place for a lot of these genres that then transformed or transmuted to television. By the way, the biggest example of this, of a show that made the leap from radio to television, was the show Dragnet, which everyone forgets about, by the way. By the way, or not by the way, but this is the memory that Bradbury has, or was quoted about in an interview about selling that joke to Burns and Allen. He says, I suppose the most important memory he has is of Mr. Electrico. On Labor Day weekend, 1932, when I was 12 years old, he came to my hometown with the Dill brothers. He was a performer sitting in an electric chair, and a stagehand pulled a switch, and he was charged with 50,000 volts of pure electricity. Lightning flashed in his eyes, and his hair stood on end. I sat below in the front row, and he reached down with a flaming sword full of electricity, and he tapped me on both shoulders and the tip of my nose, and he cried, "Live forever!" And I thought, God, that's wonderful. How do you do that? So when I left the carnival that day, I stood by the carousel and I watched the horses running around and around to the music of Beautiful Ohio, and I cried. Tears streamed down my cheeks because I knew something important had happened to me that day because of Mr. Electrico. I felt changed. And so I went home, and within days, I started to write, and I've never stopped. Bradbury cited Jules Verne, and H.G. Wells as his primary science fiction influences. He identified with Verne, saying, quote, he believes the human being is in a strange situation in a very strange world, and he believes that we can triumph by behaving morally. It's very important, by the way, to remember about Bradbury's writing, more so than Asimov, who was sort of neutral on morality in his writing, or even Heinlein or Philip K. Dick, who was more bitter and cynical and sarcastic. Bradbury was a mid-century moralist. He still believed in Christian morality. He still believed that you could actually find good in people and that we had a responsibility to dig that out. In regard to his education, however, Bradbury said, and this relates directly to Fahrenheit 451, quote, libraries raised me. I don't believe in colleges and universities. I believe in libraries because most students don't have any money. When I graduated from high school, it was during the Depression and we had no money. I couldn't go to college, so I went to the library 3 days a week for 10 years. So I graduated from the library when I was 28 years old. You know, when I read about guys like Ray Bradbury and when I read about how impactful things like the Depression and World War II, and Philip K. Dick was very impressed by the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So was Heinlein, quite frankly, as was Isaac Asimov. Most of the folks who wound up being science fiction writers at the end, well, the mid part to the end of the 20th century, they were seeking a way to, I think, merge science and morality together while also recognizing that the human condition is fraught with danger. And Bradbury, I think, got closest to touching on the positive aspects of that. And even in Fahrenheit 451, a book that is about not positive things, it's not a happy ending, but the ending is definitely hopeful. Let's just say that. So again, I'd like to welcome John to the podcast. I've rambled long enough as I usually do. So I'm going to open up the floor to him. And by the way, I'm in my new podcast studio. So in case you're watching this on video, no, I did not just graduate into a black room, such as a red shirted man in a black room. I actually have a new podcast studio on location in the town in which I live, and we'll have a little more details about that in subsequent podcasts. But this is the beginning. This is the grand opening. This is the gala event, such as it were, for our recording today. So we're going to work out some technical things, and we invited John along to help us out with that, as well as talk about the book. But let me open up with a question here for John. I know that you were very, very excited to read this book. So talk about Ray Bradbury, talk about Fahrenheit 451 and its impact specifically on your worldview as I consider you to be a sales leader, but think of it yourself in the role in which you're in. Talk about the impact of this book.
So, man, I love that you're talking about Heinlein, Asimov, Philip K. Dick, right? Because I think I was in eighth grade whenever a girl at the time that I was in school with, her name's Laura Fronick. She works for, I think, like Industrial Light and Magic is who she works for now, right? So she's done some very cool things. But she comes to me and she goes, "Hey, you need to read this book." And I had a crush on her, and I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. I'll read the book." But we're also friends, So I read this book, and I'd already read Heinlein, right? A lot of Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land, Job, Number of the Beast. I'd read lots of Gerald, right? And I like what you're talking about here because I didn't really appreciate it until I was rereading it this next time. He's actually trying to keep it very artful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not just like a story filled with a bunch of like numbers and a theoretical way of thinking about a scientific thing that they're excited to show off. It's not really the place for like nerds to go get lost and to do this thing. It is very much a bridge between, very science fiction, very much in the future, but it's still prose. It's still very much a piece of writing.
Yes.
And hitting this now, I was probably 13 or 14 when I read this. I think I probably read it again at some point in high school. And then I don't think I've read it since then,
Hmm.
and reading it now as an adult, I've been having this weird season of really appreciating how much being a self-motivated reader has led me to the place that I'm at right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like I don't really think about how much I read and how much I ingest and how that shows up in my coaching and my working with clients and stuff like that. But like we both live in small towns in Texas, man.
Hmm.
I live in a suburb called White Settlement, which is like what a name, right? Can you imagine going back 25 years ago when there is no internet and the only source of news that you have is what the local paper creator wants to put in front of you or the news and everything? Like that seems such a foreign concept now, even though we're
Hmm.
getting a new version through AI prompts and search results and reinforcing our own biases, but that's a whole other
That's a
conversation.
whole other, that's a whole other, we may get to some of that today, but that's a whole other thing.
But this idea of, like I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks. How different would I be had I not read Heinlein at 9 years old and David
Hmm.
Gerrold, who, like, I remember my brother coming to me with a stack of 5 books, and Number of the Beast was one of them, Job was one of them, and then David Gerrold, which was, he's a gay man writing about alien invasion on the planet of Earth.
Hmm.
And he goes, "Don't tell mom you're reading these books." That was the only thing he saw. That's the only thing he told me, right? So now I'm reading these books that are way too old for me, and I'm getting introduced to these ideas like probably way before most other people are. You know, how does that impact me, right? And then my thing now is anything that where I think I'm deficient and I need to go improvement, first place, I'm gonna go buy some books, right? We're doing a customer service project for one of our clients. And first thing is like, I have a lot of opinions about service, but let me go see what the pros are talking about. So that way I don't have to recreate the wheel or start all the way over. And
Hmm.
now it's this first step, it's this first pivot. I'm gonna go see the other books that other people are talking about. I'm gonna go dive into those books, not to completely learn the whole thing because I do have some positions and perspectives on it because I've been doing this for a while, but why would I try to start all the way at zero? You know?
Hmm.
And I think when we're young and we're like new in leadership and entrepreneurship, however you want to package that, it's very easy to be like, well, my stuff is not like anybody else's, right? And we create
Right.
this island for us to hang out on that doesn't really serve us, right? Because, while it's not the same, variations on a theme start to apply. So I've been reading this book and on some level kind of frustrated because I do read so much for just business and for improvement. Like, come on, can we get through like the fancy art prose stuff and like let's just get to the meat of it and everything. And so I had this kind of weird duality of like I needed to kind of like find the right gear to
Hmm.
actually like, you know, work through the book. So that took
Hmm.
me a couple of days. But the whole time I'm just like appreciating it of like, God, I would be fundamentally a different person if it not for all the reading that I do. And I wouldn't be able to charge the rates that I charge if I didn't feel like I could find my way to the answer. But it's always through books and literature.
It's interesting that you say that because that's part of the reason why we do this podcast, right? Because,
Exactly. Yeah.
you know, yeah, business books are great. I'm not knocking business books. That's fine. But there's a whole 400 and I mean, oh, so book technology, and we can talk a little bit about this too. Book technology in and of itself is a 500-year-old, approaching 600-year-old technology.
Hmm.
Business books exclusively focused on sales, marketing, finance, operations, my area, psychology, focused in those quote unquote business specific areas. That only really started to ramp up within the last 50 to 100 years of book technology. The vast majority, 4/5 of book technology, 80%, well over 80%, 90% of books before that were focused on everything else other than business. And that's one of the points of this podcast is if you're just reading business books, you're missing out on like 90% of everything else in the world. And I mean, I've said it before. You can learn more about emotional intelligence from reading a Jane Austen novel. Just discipline yourself to read Pride and Prejudice. Don't go read another Daniel Goleman book. And I don't have a problem with Goleman, by the way. I've read Emotional Intelligence. I've read it many times. It's dog-eared. I've got it. But Goldman can only tell you the mechanical, and this is where the science fiction piece comes in. He can only tell you the mechanical stuff of how it clicks together and why, but he
Yep.
can't tell you the what of the wisdom of the meaning underneath that. So you need both of those together. That's why we do this podcast. But then the other thing I love that you said, we talked about how you started off with like, Heinlein and Garwald and all these guys, right? Early, right? Weirdly enough, I started off with Isaac Asimov. That's where I read, we're going to do iRobot later on a little bit this month. I started out with that book, and going back and rereading that has been kind of a little bit trippy,
Yeah.
because I started off with, that's the place I started off with. And so Asimov is definitely less of a moralist and more and less focused on the poetry and more focused on the reportage of science fiction. And I didn't get to Heinlein until I was in high school, and I was already sort of, I don't know, warped in my cynicism about humanity. I mean, I'd already seen Blade Runner, so that had already infected me. But I'd also had a good bit of like Star Trek: The Next Generation underneath
Oh yeah,
me.
absolutely.
And so I came to Heinlein with this mid-century moralism, and Heinlein sort of was like,
Yeah, not yeah. You can take
and
all
that's
that
going to help
and
you.
throw it out. We're talking about everything outside of that container, if you
That's
will,
right.
right?
That's
Space
right.
travel and time travel and, you know, some crazy stuff, right? Like,
Right. Well, then you
okay,
got Philip K. Dick asking a great question, which again, we're going to read Dick's short stories here on the podcast too this month.
epic.
Do androids dream of electric sheep? Like the first time I heard that title, and this is just after I'd seen Blade Runner, because I saw the movie first and then I went back and read the book. And I was like, what, who comes up with that? Who even
Yeah,
thinks like that? That's not Ray Bradbury, right? Ray
no,
Bradbury would have looked at that and been like, yeah, he's got talent, but I have no idea what's going on over there.
yeah, it's like it's I think Bradbury is sci-fi for people who have not made the decision that they love sci-fi yet. Right?
Yeah, I would
Because
agree with
like
that.
especially towards the end when he's going again talking about the Beatles and like I'm like in the I'm in the wrap up phase of the book, right? And I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but he's talking about the Beatles and the
Hmm.
Hound and all of this stuff. And I was like, God, like, can we stop being so artsy? Can we just call it what it is and everything? And then I'm like, wait a minute, like, shut up, idiot. Like, this is his art. Like, you wouldn't want someone else coming over your art and doing all this stuff. So just shut up and enjoy it. And it
Let the
was
man work.
yeah, yeah, book, if you will.
Let him cook. Right, as kids say these days.
It was because like I had the same kind of situation a little bit with True Grit of like, God, like this person.
Hmm.
Wait a minute, it's a story, dude. Like I'm so Captain Literal that sometimes I'm like, this would never really happen. Oh, wait, we're kind of living through a version of this potentially right now. That's very odd and interesting. And my wife, who works on my team, she worked at Half Price Books for 15 years before she started to work with me. And
Okay.
Half Price is known for like pushing back against banned books and everything.
Hmm.
This has been a topic we've talked about and we talk about a lot of just like, we're not going to limit the flow of information and everything. I'm curious, are your kids readers?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. How
Oh yeah.
how much do you police what they read?
So I always get asked this question, and I think it's a parent's job to know what a child is reading.
Mhm.
And I also think it's a parent's job to, just like they would with a television show or a movie, to sort of understand that individual child's emotional temperament and how
Yes.
that book is going to impact that emotional temperament. And so my mom was very much sort of free range because she's a baby boomer. So she was very much free range. She wasn't really,
Mhm.
I can say she wasn't paying too close attention, but she believed in the freedom of availability to information and how could a book harm you? It's just a set of ideas, right?
Yeah.
I come at it from a different perspective because I'm on the bottom end of Gen X, right? And so I come at it from the perspective of, yeah, there's ideas in these books, but if your emotional temperament doesn't match your ability to sort of deal with these things, then I'm giving you a loaded bomb. Like I would
Yeah.
never read, let me pick something. I would not give Fahrenheit 451 to he's 7 now. So when he turns 9, I probably wouldn't give it to my 9-year-old just because I know his temperament, right?
Mhm.
It would deeply upset him. Like something with seismic would move inside of him that quite frankly, I'm not ready for it to move inside of him. And I get it. Yeah, that's my comfort zone. I
Yeah.
absolutely am acknowledging that. But with that being said, my 14-year-old and my 19-year-old have both read Fahrenheit 451, and we've talked about it. And they
Mhm.
read it when they were, I mean, my 14-year-old read when she was 12, my 19-year-old read it when she was like 16. And they
Okay.
both had different opinions about the book. My
Mhm.
16-year-old she was kind of okay with it. She's like, okay, well, whatever. Because she's, they're Gen Zers. So like, okay, kind of,
Yeah. I don't read books anyway. I'm
what
just,
are we doing here?
why do I need a
Uh,
book when I have this? And
here's what we're
like
doing.
they're not even seeing that this is
Well,
easier to limit and choke than the books
well,
are.
and we limit, and I love it. We're going to talk about the screens and everything. We limit the screens.
Yeah.
So we're
Mhm.
we're bibliophiles. Like one of the challenges in our home that we now moved into, and one of the challenges I see in a lot of homes is there's no bookshelves. We've got so many books. We had more books than we have furniture
We did
across,
this the other day.
multiple genres. Oh my gosh, all kinds of things, right? And it's like, where do I put all this? Like,
Yep.
what are we doing here? And my wife is even like, you got to give away some of these books. I'm like, I got to read it.
We moved into this house a year ago and we have a
Yeah.
rather large book collection. And even within that family book collection, there's different book collections. There's the books that Melissa displays on now we have a wall of shelves, which is really, really nice.
That's
Very like
awesome.
maybe the coolest thing I've ever done. And now like I'm just used to it. And then as other people come over, they're like, holy, like it's super nice. And then I have my library. And my library is the non-public facing books, right? So it's all the kung fu books and the philosophy and the all this. Like, if you know me really well, I feel like you can look at my library, my personal library, and be like, oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I'm
that tracks.
saying? But we were moving in here, and my wife was like, I don't think we need to hire movers. And I was like, oh, you don't think we need to hire movers? And she's like, yeah, no, I think we can do it. I was like, cool. Let's pack the books first, and then we'll make that decision, right? So let her go with it for a while, and then it's 26 boxes of books, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, how do you feel now? She's like, oh yeah,
Oh, you
movers,
you were
movers.
hiring people.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because like just over the weekend, my daughter, who's really getting into writing and her own book collection, like she's
Mhm.
buying copies of books that Melissa and I own because she wants her own copy for her own. And she goes,
Mhm.
like I have a pretty small book collection, but she has like 200 books, which is like
Mhm.
not a small book
That's not a small book
collection
collection.
because like I think you're a one percenter if you have more than like 50 books.
We're oh yeah. I'll tell you. Finish your story. 'Cause I'm gonna tell you something that like frustrates me. Go ahead.
Like it's crazy to me, just like the curse of knowledge, right?
Right.
How can you get to be our age and only have like 25 or 50 books that you want to have an ongoing relationship with? You know what I'm saying? Like my grandmother used to say this thing, and she's the one who really unlocked reading with me and everybody in my family, was that these were her friends. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? And I can't like there are so many impactful books on my shelves that have fundamentally like changed and given me perspective and everything. And like only having 25, like that seems crazy.
There was an article I read in, or maybe it might have been the headline. I don't remember specifically. And I think it was in the Atlantic. It had to be one of those like mid-tier, and yes, I'm going to slam the Atlantic here, mid-tier, mid-wit journals. It's a journal for people who think they're smart, but they're really not. Because it's not really good ideas in there. But anyway, whatever. Point is, I read the headline, or it might have been an article, something about how like, and this was back maybe in 2020 or 2021, about how if you were reading to your child, that was a sign of white privilege. And I just thought libraries literally are almost on every street corner. Bookstores, you talk about your wife working at half price books, you can walk into bookstores and they will not kick you out for reading a book.
They will not.
They
You're
will
just happy
not.
you're there.
They're just happy you're there. You have Amazon, say what you want about Jeff Bezos. Man started with books
Hmm.
because they were the one piece of technology. And by the way, this is the apocryphal story. He packed up everything in his car with his wife and drove across the country, and they had to figure out what they were going to put on this online thing because he saw this internet thing happening. And the book is the thing that he picked because it's not fruit and it's not pets. It's not weird shapes. Everybody knows what it is. It's easy to Okay. Books, fundamentally books, right? Even in the poorest neighborhoods in America, you can literally go 2 streets over and there's a library. I know. I've lived in some of the poorest areas of the country. Books are not closed to anyone in our society and culture unless you want to close that door. So to tie it into, number one, I'm offended because as an African American person, books are agnostic from my perspective anyway. Certain books are agnostic. Other books are not. I'll grant you that.
Sure.
But for the most part, authors just want to tell a story. They're not really, they just want to tell a story. They want to tell the best story they possibly can to the widest number of people they possibly can with a 500-year-old technology that everybody understands. That's number one. Number two, and I told this to a young couple who was in my church. Oh gosh, years ago when they were having their first kids, and they were like, how did you raise your kids to be like, how to speak so clearly and to be articulate and and I'm like, because we read to them. Like I even read to my 7-year-old. We're reading the Chronicles of Narnia right now. My 7-year-old is loving that. Now,
Yeah.
it's me and his older sister and his mom reading it. Like we're in sort of this weird rotation because of just how the schedules work and all that in our house. And so depending on who we can get, he'll have them read. And times I have no idea what's going on in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Like I don't know where I'm at. I'm just like, dude, I'm just reading this. I have no clue what's happening, dude. And he's like, don't worry, Daddy, just read it.
This
Literally
isn't
pats my
about
cheek.
you.
Exactly. He pats my cheeks. Just read the book, Daddy. It's like, okay, that's fine. I will read the words. I have no idea what's happening in the story, and
Hmm.
And he is blown away by this.
Yeah.
It's opening up doors in his head. Now, say what you want about C.S. Lewis. By the way, I would not read the Screw Tape Letters or Mere Christianity to him. or or the abolition of man. That's not appropriate for a 7-year-old. Sorry.
But hold on. Like, and my amazing wife would have this like fit all the time about, yeah, it's a science fiction, but not young adult, right? And like, how do
Right.
you cut the onion and how
Yeah.
do you group things? Like it's very interesting because, I think we're going to punish authors for trying to cover more content as
Right.
opposed to staying in one lane so that way it's easy to shelve in the bookstore. That's a little absurd, right?
It's
Speaking as
ridiculous.
someone who's written a business book and is now currently trying to write a narrative, like screw you, buddy. I'm gonna write what I want to write.
Right. Yeah. Like I would love to have seen Cinderella brought to you by James Baldwin. I'd have read that. But I don't know that my 9-year-old would have been interested in that. My 9-year-old
Yeah.
would have looked at that and been like, I think I'll pass. you know?
Well, so there's this line that I used to hate, right? And it's if the book is bad and you can't read it, it's the author's fault. And I was like, oh, I kind of hate that. But the longer I live, as an author, the more I'm like, right?
Well,
Extreme ownership. It's my fault if you didn't finish it, right?
but I think so. I'm a person who has written 3 books and I'm working on a fourth one. I'm grinding
Mhm.
out a fourth one, right? It'll
You
come
sound very
out some.
excited about it.
It, it's
Grinding out a fourth one.
it's turned into a whole slog thing. Um,
This is
and
not what you wanted to talk about
this is
today,
not what I
but
wanted to
we're
talk about,
digging
but it's
into
fine.
it. You're welcome.
It's fine. We're digging in. We're digging in.
Yeah.
We're going in. We're going in the mine. We're gonna get some gold out of here. But I write on purpose difficult books
That's what I'm
because
doing here. I'm
I'm
choosing to
a
make it difficult.
right because I'm a complicated guy and I'm in an era where I am fighting uphill. And I've said this before on the podcast. I think I've said it with you on interviews that we've done, conversations we've had. Um, I'm fighting uphill against short attention spans, the 60-second, 30-second hummingbird TikTok generation mindset, whatever.
Hmm.
I'm also fighting uphill against a flood of quote unquote content. And by the way, I agree with Martin Scorsese. Movies are not content. Movies are movies. Books are not content. Books are books. But again, everything's been dumped into that content bucket and swirled around. That way we can bring it
See,
to its lowest common denominator. So I'm fighting
I'm
uphill
the
against
opposite.
this.
I'm the opposite as you. To me, and sorry to like, but I just
No,
think
go
that this
ahead.
isn't it. I had to stop thinking about books as books and movies as movies and songs as songs, right? And
Okay.
really just like shove them all together and understand that it's about the story was the thing that I ended up kind of going with, right? A great
Okay.
song has got a story inside of it, right?
Well, and where I come from is the medium can be part of the message. So
Oh, 100%, right?
so
And
when I look at for Fahrenheit 451, and then I look at the movie that like Michael B. Jordan was in a couple years ago on HBO Max.
I did not watch that. I thought about it and then I was like maybe after the interview because I don't want to, I'm just so used to the movie being a letdown. I don't
But it's
even
content,
want to
John.
go
It's fine.
there.
It's just content. Fine.
Hey, right? And while you are correct, the greatness that makes this so good, I think comes from the format that it was in originally. And I think that this is
Right.
where people like screw up, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the book did good, but if we want to reach more people, let's turn it into a movie. Like I get this stuff from people all the time. Well, John, your stuff is too deep. You need to make it easier for people to consume it. And I'm like,
Hmm.
God, if we just chase that far enough, it's going to be single word dogma. Like that's going to work out great for us, right? Just
One
sell.
one
I'm
one word haikus.
exactly right. Like if anything, that's what I'm trying to push back from of stupid, outdated, dogmatic beliefs around sales that no longer serves us and probably never served us at all.
But in order to do that effectively, I don't think you can water down ideas. And that's really what
I agree.
fundamentally at the end of the day, that's what I push up against. I don't want to, if I'm in a world where the long tail is the thing, and I am in a world where the long tail is a thing now. The long tail wasn't a thing in the mid 20th century. Like it was mass and okay, fine.
Yep.
You had to appeal to the largest number of people and the greatest common denominator. Cool. Now I don't have to. I need to sell 2 books a month to 2 people that want to hear my voice, and everybody else, not to put too fine a point on it, but can go to hell. Like if the idea is too complicated for you, or if the argument's too long, or the sentences are too rambling, or the paragraphs don't link together in the way that you want, or you can't hear my voice in your head, and so you're reading the words on the page. You don't. I'm not for you, and that's okay. Go
Yeah.
away. I'll go find the
That
2 people that are for me,
yep.
and I'll sell 2 books a month, and I'll make $4 in royalties, and I'll move on with the rest of my life.
Yep.
Now, most people will push back on that, and they'll go, "Well, you spent $5,000 to make $4." Yeah, so
Well, I think that comes down to what the intention behind the book is, right? And
correct, right?
it was so funny because whenever we decided that we were going to launch the book, Melissa was already working on my team with me, and
Hmm.
she was like, "Okay, can I tell you the concern?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what's up?" And she's like, "I've seen these people, right? They wrote a business book that was going to be the game changer, and then they show up to Half Price Books with like 7 boxes of the
Hmm.
same book because it didn't work." And I was like, "Okay, interesting." And I had a very John moment. Why are you telling me that? She goes, she goes, "Well, I'm concerned that, you might do something similar." And I was like, okay, heard, like, okay,
But this
why?
is why our wives exist to provide goalposts and warning
100%,
signs along the way.
But I was like, okay, I appreciate you bringing this up. Let's
Hmm.
acknowledge that I am who I am and that I've already told myself that this book changes absolutely nothing the next day and that I still have to work to put it out.
Hmm.
Like my job is to put the book in the hands of the people who need it through my actions and activities. I'm not
Hmm.
expecting for anyone to find it because that's absurd entitled thinking in my opinion, right? There's just too many marketplaces, there's too much messaging going on to really think you're going to like stand out unless you already
Hmm.
have an audience. And I don't. So like the whole time I was writing and getting it published and doing the whole thing, it was like you still got to sell, buddy. You still got to sell. This changes
Hmm.
nothing. If anything, it might make your lift a little bit easier. And that's
Hmm.
how I approached it. And that's where it was super helpful. But I had a coach whispering all that stuff in my ear to kind of keep me grounded with my own expectations. And I think that some people just don't have appropriate expectations when it comes to like writing a book or putting it out or different things like that. We're lucky in the
Yes.
fact that the book feeds our business. So I don't need to make money on the book. The fact that we have books gets us into some of the conversations that we're looking to be in.
Right, right. And for me, the book, so the reason the fourth book right now is a slog is because it's in a totally different genre. And I'm doing a totally different thing than I normally would have done. And it's requiring
Mhm.
a little bit more transparency on my part um, than I maybe previously have been comfortable with. And particularly in thinking about how it may impact the brand and blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
But it's also, again, I just picked a difficult vehicle to drive the content. Yes, I did say the word to drive the content in.
I don't want to
Fine.
call it that, but
I don't want to call it that. No, because you know what? At a certain point, and this is where Scorsese and I might disagree. Um, we have to figure out where quality exists in books and songs and movies.
yep.
And what is the difference between dreck that's garbage? And by the way, during the mid 20th century, there were a lot of science fiction writers who published in a lot of science fiction what do you call it, journals that were all over the place, that were absolute dreck. We've never heard of those guys.
Yep.
And it's only the big four, Heinlein, Asimov, Bradbury, and Dick. Those four are the ones that are on the Mount Rushmore of science fiction. And everybody else washed away.
Would agree.
Um, Now, did everybody else wash away because there was a mass of people that selected and curated? And I'm not talking about publishers and agents. That's part of the process. But I'm talking about there was a mass of people that selected that this was good
Hmm.
versus now where everyone can say everything is good because it's subjective and there's a long enough tail to where if my mom buys a book, I can say it's good, right? And is that and that's the war we're actually having is a war of quality. We're not having a war of art. We're having a war of quality. And it's really tough to have a war of quality, particularly in a world that is, well, kind of the kind of world that Ray Bradbury was describing in Fahrenheit 451, which we should get back to the book.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're gonna skip forward a bunch of different spots, and yeah, you're gonna like this book. You're gonna want to pick it up. Um, and we're going to go to, well, Montag gets sick, and he has a conversation with the second main character, the villain, I guess, such as it were in this book, Captain Beatty. And Captain Beatty lays out basically the entire game here in the chapter, The Hearth and the Salamander. Back to Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Montag made sure the book was well hidden behind the pillow, climbed slowly back into bed, arranged the covers over his knees and across his chest, half sitting. And after a while, Mildred moved and went out of the room, and Captain Beatty strolled in, his hands in his pockets. Shut the relatives up, said Beatty, looking around at everything except Montag and his wife. This time Mildred ran. The yammering voices stopped yelling in the parlor. Captain Beatty sat down in the most comfortable chair with a peaceful look on his ruddy face. He took time to prepare and light his brass pipe and puff out a great smoke cloud. Just thought I'd come by and see how the sick man is. How'd you guess? Beatty smiled his smile, which showed the candy pinkness of his gums and the tiny candy whiteness of his teeth. I've seen it all. You were going to call for a night off. Montauk sat in bed. Well, said Beatty, take the night off. He examined his eternal matchbox, the lid of which said guaranteed 1 million lights in this igniter, and began to strike the chemical match abstractedly. Blow out, strike, speak a few words, blow out. He looked at the flame, he blew, he looked at the smoke. When will you be well? Tomorrow, the next day, maybe. First of the week. Beatty puffed his pipe. Every fireman, sooner or later, hits this. They only need understanding to know how the wheels run. Need to know the history of our profession. They don't feed it to the rookies like they used to. Damn shame. Only fire chiefs remember it now. I'll let you in on it. Mildred fidgeted. Beatty took a full minute to settle himself in and think back for what he wanted to say. When did it all start, you ask, this job of ours? How did it all come about? Where and when? I'd say it really got started around about a thing called the Civil War. Even though our rulebook claims it was founded earlier, the fact is we didn't get along well until photography came into its own. Then motion pictures in the early 20th century, radio, television, things began to have mass. Montag sat in the bed, not moving. And because they had mass, they became simpler, said Beatty. Once books appealed to a few people here, there, everywhere, they could afford to be different. The world was roomy. But then the world got full of eyes and elbows and mouths, double, triple, quadruple population, films, radios, and magazines. Books leveled down to a sort of paste pudding norm. Do you follow me? I think so. Beatty peered at the smoke pattern he had put out in the air. Picture it. 19th century man and his horses, dogs, carts, slow motion. Then in the 20th century, speed up your camera, books cut shorter, condensations, digests, tabloids, everything boils down to the gag, the snap ending. Snap ending? Mildred nodded. Classics cut to fit 15-minute radio shows and cut again to fill a 2-minute book column, winding up at last as a 10 or 12-line dictionary resume. I exaggerate, of course. The dictionaries were for reference, but many were those whose sole knowledge of Hamlet, you know the title, certainly Montag. It is probably only a faint rumor of a title to you, Mrs. Montag, whose sole knowledge, as I say, of Hamlet was a one-page digest in a book that claimed, now at last you can read all the classics, keep up with your neighbors. Do you see? Out of the nursery, into the college, and back to the nursery. There's your intellectual pattern for the past 5 centuries or more. Mildred arose and began to move around the room, picking up things and putting them down. Beatty ignored her and continued. Speed the film up, Montag. Quick, click, pick, look, eye, flick, now, here, there, swift pace, up, down, in, out, why, how, who, what, where, bang, smack, wallop, bing, bang, bong, boom. Digest, 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 politics. 1 column, 2 sentences, a headline. Then in midair, all vanishes. Whirl man's mind around so fast under the pumping hands of publishers, exploiters, broadcasters at the centrifuge, flings off all unnecessary time-wasting thought. Mildred smoothed the bedclothes. Montag felt his heart jump and jump again as she patted his pillow. Right now she was pulling at his shoulder, trying to get him to move so she could take the pillow out and fix it nicely and put it back and perhaps cry out and stare or simply reach down her hand and say, "What's this?" and hold up the hidden book with touching innocence. School is short and discipline relaxed. Philosophies, histories, languages dropped. English and spelling gradually neglected. Finally, almost completely ignored. Life is immediate. The job counts. Pleasure lies all about after work. Why learn anything save pressing buttons, pulling switches, fixing nuts and bolts? Let me fix your pillow, said Mildred. No, whispered Montag. The zipper displaces the button, and man lacks just that much time to think while dressing at dawn, a philosophical hour, and thus a melancholy hour. Mildred said, here. Get away, said Montag. Life becomes one big pratfall, Montag. Everything. Bang, boff, and wow. For God's sakes, let me be, cried Montag passionately. Beatty opened his eyes wide. Mildred's hands had frozen behind the pillow. Her fingers were tracing the book's outline, and as the shape became familiar, her face looked surprised and then stunned. Her mouth opened to ask a question. Empty the theater, save for clowns, and furnish the rooms with glass walls and pretty colors running up and down the walls like confetti, or blood, or sherry, or sartarine. You like baseball, don't you, Montag? Baseball's a fine game. Now Beatty was almost invisible, a voice somewhere behind a screen of smoke. What's this? Asked Mildred almost with delight. Montag heaved back against her arms. What's this here? Sit down, Montag shouted. She jumped away, her hands empty. We're talking. Beatty went on as if nothing had happened. You like bowling, don't you, Montag? Bowling, yes. And golf. Golf's a fine game. Basketball, a fine game. Billiards, pool, football, fine games, all of them. More sports for everyone. Group spirit, fun. And you don't have to think, huh? Organize and super organized, super sports. More cartoons and books, more pictures. The mind drinks less and less. Impatience, highways full of crowds going somewhere, nowhere. The gasoline refugee, towns turn into motels. People in nomadic surges from place to place, following the moon tide, living tonight in the room where you slept this noon and I the night before. Mildred went out of the room and slammed the door. The parlor aunts began to laugh at the parlor uncles. Now let's take up the minorities in our civilization, shall we? Bigger the population, the more minorities. Don't step on the toes of the dog lovers, the cat lovers, doctors, lawyers, merchants, chiefs, Mormons, Baptists, Unitarians, second generation Chinese, Swedes, Baptists, Italians, Germans, Texans, Brooklynites, Irishmen, people from Oregon or Mexico. The people in this book, this play, this TV serial are not meant to represent any actual painters, cartographers, mechanics anywhere. The bigger your market, Montag, the less you handle controversy. Remember that? All the minor minorities with all their navels to be kept clean. Authors full of evil thoughts. Lock up your typewriters. They did. Magazines became a nice blend of vanilla tapioca. Books, so the damned snobbish critics said, were dishwater. No wonder books stopped selling, the critics said. But the public, knowing what it wanted, spending happily, let the comic books survive. And the three-dimensional sex magazines, of course. There you have it, Montag. It didn't come from the government down. There was no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with. No. Technology, mass exploitation, and minority pressure carried the trick, thank God. Today, thanks to them, you can stay happy all the time. You are allowed to read comics, the good old confession, or trade journals. Yes, but what about the fireman then? Asked Montag. Ah. Beatty leaned forward and famous to smoke from his pipe. What more easily explained and natural? Was school turning out more runners, jumpers, racers, tinkerers, grabbers, snatchers, flyers, and swimmers instead of examiners, critics, knowers, and imaginative creators? The word intellectual, of course, became the swear word it deserved to be. You always dread the unfamiliar. Surely you remember the boy in your own school class who was exceptionally quote unquote bright, did most of the reciting and answering while the others sat like so many leaden idols hating him. And wasn't it this bright boy you selected for beatings and tortures after hours? Of course it was. We must all be alike. Not everyone born free and equal, as the Constitution says, but everyone made equal. Each man the image of every other, then all are happy, for there are no mountains to make them cower to judge themselves against. So, a book is a loaded gun in the house next door. Burn it. Take a shot from the weapon. Breach man's minds. Who knows what might be the target of a well-read man? Me? I won't stomach them for a minute. And so when houses were finally fireproofed completely all over the world, you were correct in your assumption the other night, there was no longer the need of firemen for the old purposes. They were given a new job as custodians of our peace of mind, the focus of our understandable and rightful dread of being inferior, official censors, judges, and executors. That's you, Montag, and that's me. That's a long bit there that I read. I read it on purpose because you can't really break up Captain Beatty's speech into little tiny parts, particularly that bit which hit me right in the gut about the minorities and censorship coming not from the top down, but totalitarianism from the bottom up. Captain Beatty is the classic bureaucratic leader trapped in a system he understands almost totally and completely because it works for him. Montag, of course, stands in as the person who has woken up to the manipulation of the Matrix, but he doesn't know what to do about it quite just yet at this point in the book. He doesn't have a plan. He's just still in shock. Captain Beatty and guys like Captain Beatty, and this is a warning for our time, they don't mind if you've been awakened or whatever the term is you would like. He just doesn't want you to take any action to disrupt the system. Newspapers, music, radio, television, cable news, and now, and Bradbury died in 2012, right on the cusp of this all hitting. Now, social media and the internet are blamed for the tendency of people to give up control of their minds to those who appear to be in control of events. By the way, the unnamed country in Fahrenheit 451 is in a state of perpetual war, just as a side note, with every other country, just as Oceania was in 1984 by George Orwell, which we'll read in Q3 of next year, if we're all still around to read it in Q3 of next year. By the way, when I read this book and I read about the firefighters, I thought of the band Rage Against the Machine, and the great line that they have in that song, "Bulls on Parade." They don't got to burn the books; they just remove them. John, there are many different flavors and types in our world today of getting red pilled, quote unquote, or waking up or becoming woke. And yet, I sense behind all of them a lot of Captain Beatty, but maybe that's just my conspiratorial thinking. Um, how can we be more like Montag and less like Captain Beatty?
So this is unique perspective on Captain Beatty because and I think we're going to talk about this part a little later.
Mhm.
There's an add-on from another character that like blew my mind
Mhm.
about Beatty right now. I don't know if I talked about this on the show, but I'm prior service. I joined the
Mhm.
military in May of 2001. And obviously in September of 2001, it was no longer just a theoretical exercise.
Right.
And there's so much of this awakening that he goes through, right? And part of
Mhm.
me, as I'm reading this, I'm like, God, the pacing of this is just so fast. It doesn't happen this quick. It takes longer to wake up. It takes longer to kind of fall out of the fold. It takes longer. But man, when I think about, September 11th, and this is no longer an exercise,
This is not a drill.
it's not a drill, you know, uh, instantly pushed me to the place of like, I don't know that this is the place I need to be.
Mhm.
Right. Because like I was feeling that before, but then we were having this conversation, right? And the military is filled with stuff like this, right? Boot camp is an indoctrination process, right? It's
Yeah.
meant to break you down to nothing. And then
It's
we put
designed to be that
the
way.
person it needs to be.
Yeah.
And it's for the reasons that it's for, right? Uh, but like as I'm going through this and I'm like, nah, no, no, it's not that quick. It can be that quick,
Mhm.
right? If you go through the right experiences, have the right mentors around you, have the right environment for it to show up, it can be a blazingly quick process.
Mhm.
Um, but like I just keep going back to that, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, you know. And we were sitting in a room called the day room, right? Anyone who's been in the army understands what the day room is. It's like a communal room in there, and there's a
Mhm.
TV in there, right?
Mhm.
And so we're in there, and I'm this kid from Texas, 20. My birthday's actually on 9/11, so I turned 21 the day that happened. I have a great story about telling a drill sergeant that I was going to get to go off post that weekend, and he told me, "No, you're not." And
Not anymore, you're not.
we're in the day room, and I'm having this very disconnected experience of like, what have I signed up for? What am I really going through? And I'm in Georgia at the time, right? And I'm there with guys from Philly and New York and DC and people who are having a profoundly different experience than what I'm going through as a kid from Texas. And man, I think there's about 30 people in my cohort from my class, right? And we had the night class, and so we're talking about it either that day or the next day. And everyone else is like, man, we just got to go turn it into a parking lot. Just go nuke it, turn it into a parking lot. We don't have to deal with this anymore. And I'm like, doesn't that make us the same? Doesn't that make us like not any better than the people that did this?
Mhm.
And the heat that like that kind of commentary was getting in that space.
Mhm.
Um, so like reading this now as a 44-year-old guy who's gone through that experience, has had to deload himself, right? Had therapy and working through it and everything. It can happen that quick,
Mhm.
but you also just have to be aware of, for lack of a better term, spin, right? Because
And that's what Captain Beatty delivers, by the way.
that's exactly what Beatty delivers, by the way. And it's so easy to get caught up in spin, right?
Mhm.
And he's on one level like demonizing spin,
Mhm.
right? We're not going to have short multi-purposed content, that is just watered down to the lowest forms. So that way you can be there. But the answer is not to just take it all away, though, right? It's very much, well, this was the problem, so this was our solution. And look how better we are. And like, if you're drinking the Kool-Aid, I bet it tastes amazing in that moment, right? Like, backing up in my military story, we first get to boot camp and we have a captain who's in charge of our company. And the drill sergeants were being really mean, like
Mhm.
really mean, yelling at us, making us do lots of push-ups and making us like do all this crazy stuff. And in the back of my head, I was like, you know what? That captain, he wouldn't let them do that to us if he knew what was really happening. Right. And then a couple of days after that, I see the captain being the person who's reinforcing the drill sergeants. And I just like had this moment of like a shattered worldview, of
Right.
like oh, he's not going to save us, and then like, duh, idiot, I'm the only one not on this page, you know. And I mean,
Well,
when
it's
you
a hell of a thing to be robbed of your preconceived notions.
fair, right? Or to be in a situation to where like this feels very military-esque, right? Like
It
these guys
does,
have
yeah.
deep brotherhood. They spend a lot of time together. He just
Hmm.
shows up at his house because he knows he's going to call in sick after this
Hmm.
environment. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so very much military. And in those situations, when you're talking with someone, they're essentially telling you this is how we think about it. And it's
Right.
meant to be push the other stuff away and continue with this way forward, you know? And so it's weird to like I've been in those conversations. I remember having a conversation with drill sergeants about hand grenades and
Right.
why I shouldn't be nervous about throwing them. Why would I not be nervous, you know?
See, it's interesting. So, you said your birthday is on September 11th,
Mhm.
and um I turned 21 13 days after September 11th. And both of our lives, I would assert, and this is one of the assertions I made on this podcast this year, which is why I'm sort of approaching it in a different kind of way, particularly towards the end of our session today, or end of our episode today, where I try every episode now to talk about what are solutions to problems, because I'm done pulling apart problems 99% of the time, because all
Yeah.
we've done, from my perspective, for the last 20 years is since that since that day in Midtown Manhattan, all we've done is chew over problems, and I'm done with it. Personally, professionally, ecumenically, every other way you can possibly think of that ends with why. I'm done. We know what the problems are, number one. We know how deep the problems are, number two. We can identify what the cause of the problems is, number three. But no one has the courage to talk about solutions to the problem. Like, here's a big one. Like, you talk about Captain Beatty and spin.
Mhm.
The solution to the Captain Beatties of the world is the destruction of bureaucratic systems. That's that. That's the solution. Like, right, and everybody makes that sound right there. Everybody makes that sound right
Yeah.
there, because what you're laughing at is not the solution I'm proposing. What you're laughing at is the inevitable consequence that you can go forward with for when that bureaucratic system is destroyed. And by the way,
Yes.
I'm not talking about destroying people's lives, physical lives. What I'm talking about is taking you out of the system. So here's a very simple one. Let's take the list of all the Captain Beatties that are in the Pentagon. Let's line them up alphabetically, and let's just fire every other one of them alphabetical order. And then we cut the Pentagon's budget by 15%, and now we're done. And don't tell me that you can't find people who would be willing to do this. Rand Paul, Ron Paul, there's plenty of people floating around who'd be willing to do this. Jim Jordan, you may not agree with him politically, but we'll put that aside for just a second. There are plenty of people who would be willing to do this. That is the solution. But we laugh because the consequence on the other side of that is when you go in alphabetical order and you cut all those people out of the system, now you've got them running around in general population making trouble on the internet with
And
their past connections and past networks and past ability to raise money and da 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 da. And we don't want to actually face that consequence. We don't want the person who spent the last 15 years in the Pentagon fighting endless wars, working at Safeway, bagging groceries. Although, quite frankly, they would probably do a much better job at Safeway. I would rather have them wrecking Safeway than, I don't know, selling more weapons to Ukraine or coming up with more unique ways to, I don't know, drop more bombs on people that don't need to have bombs dropped on them, because I don't have a personal problem with them. Go work at Safeway, or go work at HEB, or go work at the gas station. Go wreck a gas station. Go wreck ExxonMobil's job. Go wreck ExxonMobil's outfit over there. You'll do less damage. But we don't actually want to do that, because why do we want to do that? We don't actually want to do that because the consequence of that, now taken from the 5,000 bureaucrats 400 miles away, now real close and up to us, we don't want to deal with. We don't want to deal with that guy as a general manager at HEB, because we know that guy would be a nightmare. Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show. But that's the way we fundamentally fix the system. That's one of the ways we can fundamentally. And so I would like to have the proposal of solutions. And a guy like Captain Beatty isn't proposing solutions. To your point, he's proposing just go. They're there.
Yeah.
There.
Make it through.
You're not smart enough to understand this, and I am. So you'll make it through if I just shepherd you through. And that's and of course that's patronizing. And Bradbury's writing this out of the perspective of the military-industrial complex and his opposition to the military-industrial complex and his opposition to police power. One of the interesting backstories behind this book is that one of the pieces of the genesis that went into this book is that, or into the story, is that he was pulled over by the cops, or he was walking with the cops because he never actually learned how to drive. And he was walking around or whatever in the park, and the cop was hassling him about walking in the park or something and gave him a ticket or whatever.
Yeah.
And he was all rebellious, just like most creative types. He was rebellious in his head, but then in reality, he just took the ticket and just went away. And he couldn't figure out how to make those two things, sort of click together in his reality. And so he came with this Captain Beatty character to sort of work through cathartically all these feelings of being oppressed by the man, which is a very 60s sort of idea.
Yeah.
But the problem is we live in 2024, and the people who used to protest against the man and now are the man. And they've been the man for a while.
Yeah. You brought up Rage Against the Machine a few moments ago. And I remember when that album came out, right? Like I'm sure you do as well. I think I was probably in seventh. And again, Laura Fronick, same person who recommended this book to me, was the person who came back. She'd taken a trip to Italy and came back and was like, man, have you heard Bulls on Parade? I was like, no, I don't even know what that is. And game changer of a song. And now it's funny because I'll see people who I knew listened to this in late teens, early 20s. Now they know really what it's about, and now they're against it. What did you think they were talking about this whole time? And when we get to that level, it's kind of these people don't even know what they're championing, right?
No.
And in some levels, which is very, very interesting. But
and I wonder if the consistent uphill battle is between not consistent uphill battle. Maybe I shouldn't frame it this way. I wonder if I'll go a third way. I'm having a thought in the middle of a thought. Let me go a third way. So the title of this section of the podcast is The Day After the Totalitarians Win the War for Control of Your Mind, right? Mm-hmm. No one ever asked this question. What happens after the totalitarians win? What happens after the Captain Beatty's win? Because the good guys don't always win. Sometimes the bad guys win. The bad guys definitely get a vote, as Jocko Willink would say. And sometimes their vote is good enough to win the day. And then they rule. And 1984 is sort of the classic novel of the totalitarians win and we're all being repressed, right? And of course, George Orwell was writing this in the face of Soviet oppression, where from his perspective, and I think from the perspective of most thinking people in the 20th century, the totalitarians won I mean, hell, Lenin said he was a totalitarian. He wasn't hiding nothing. And so they won the day, and they got to implement their rule, and they got to implement their solutions to their problems, or to the problems that they saw in market capitalism. And they got to run that experiment for 80 years in a country just to kind of see if it was going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So we know what happens the day after totalitarians win. One of my gigantic concerns in the early part of the 20th century is, and I'm seeing this particularly, and we talked a lot about books and libraries in the first part of this,
Mm-hmm.
when people don't read the books, because the books are where the stories are about what happens after the totalitarians win, they don't respect the history that came before them, and thus we wind up in the same ditch that we wound up in before.
Agreed.
Just with a different flavor of people with different names, maybe even in some cases, let me be egalitarian, different colors and different genders, but they all have the same mindset.
Mm-hmm. Like during the pandemic, I was reading, like that's where I found stoicism and really started to kind of, it was a thing that I was interested in, but during the pandemic is when I really needed to like apply it because I was
Mm-hmm.
struggling, and lockdown. And one of the things Ryan Holiday's he writes a lot about philosophy and stoicism and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just kind of talking about this idea that like this isn't the first time we've had a major lockdown.
No.
Like let's go back and let's look at I think it's like the 1912 Spanish influenza thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a big thing there. And because we were so stupid, oh, this can't happen to us. We're so much smarter and all these things, we end up creating something markedly similar,
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny because I talk about this with like some of the owners and founders that I talk to of, hey, were you around in like '08? Were you in business? Were you doing anything? Were you in sales? Because let me tell you, it was rough. I was in sales, right? And it was rough for a while after that. You had to earn the trust back. And some people still don't trust finance people and mortgagers and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had the same thing happen around COVID, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so like you can see it for the recurring patterns of what it is, or you can try to like, oh, these two things are not similar. But I feel like those people always have an agenda
Oh,
that
yeah.
really serve everyone else when they should be looking for the overlap, the commonality.
Well, they're the bosses of the Captain Beatties.
Yes, exactly right.
They're the
Mhm.
people that are giving the Captain Beatties of the world the
It's
marching
the status
orders.
quo push, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and yeah, man, such a such an interesting reread. Like I spent time kind of wondering what would it be like to read this for the very first time at my age with my experience. That would be kind of unique
Mm-hmm.
because the thing that even having read this before, right? It had been so many years, I wasn't ready for how much like content there was in the space, right? That people could turn
Yeah.
on these like TVs and they're being programmed from the TVs, right? But
Right.
that's okay. But books are, so like in my head, I'd built it out to be this very sparse, almost like a Star Trek thing. We don't have
Yeah.
books, and everything else like that. And not really seeing it for like, hey, we're taking away the opportunity for other people to inject their ideas, and we're just creating an opportunity for you to be bottle fed the ideas, right? Because then
Yep.
you don't even realize that you're missing anything, right?
Correct. That's right.
So
That's right.
you
That's
know,
right.
this other unique perspective I got a couple of years ago was like talking about they were talking about Dante actually,
Mm.
like Dante's Inferno, and they were talking about this idea that you don't have to convince everyone that the government is wrong. You just gotta like convince them that the books aren't worth reading or something like that. But the way that it was and
Mm.
God, man, I wish I could say it because it went through everything, like every bias that I possibly could have put in front of it, and just like hit me square in the head of like, oh yeah, that's very much a thing, very very much a thing.
The so this is my problem with um the idea of malinformation, disinformation. I have a problem with all of those terms coming from any government apparatchik. Period. Full stop. That's the period. That's the end of the sentence. There's no qualifier afterward. There's no but. There's no and. I have a problem with those words coming from the mouth of anybody who's getting a check based in any kind of way on any of my tax dollars. Period. Full stop. Just period. That's the end of the sentence. I don't want to hear you even say it. You can think whatever you want. The human brain is the last truly private area until Elon Musk gets that Neuralink thing really ramped up, and then we're all boned after that. But like, you can think whatever you want, but don't let it drop out your mouth. And I'm not naive enough, and this is probably why I even though I have a warrior spirit, I didn't join the military. I'm not, and it's not naive. I'm not hopeful enough that in the past there was some halcyon time when some government apparatchik didn't believe this. Please, I've read too much history. They've believed this throughout history under any system, but they had the good grace to not open their mouth and say it. And what troubles me greatly is we've lost, the government apparatchiks seem to have lost, the Captain Beattys of the world seem to have lost the ability to keep their mouths shut and just run the game. They want to now, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, they want to now be applauded for the cleverness with which they are running the game. And maybe and they gussied up by saying, oh, well, we're informing you. But the thing is, even when we only had 5 channels and 4 newspapers in a town that all reported the same thing, and like 3 copies of Time magazine and Reader's Digest that was on everybody's table, and you talk about living in a place where, you know, maybe there weren't many minorities in the neighborhood, you know, back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Even when we had that system, we were still, for that system and that time, educated enough as a populace to recognize BS. And so what has happened over the course of time is not that the public has become less educated to recognize BS, and I'm using public as in a mass term. Okay, I'm not talking about specific individuals. The public has gotten more information and more facts, right? Which, by the way, we can access facts not on screens on our walls, like in Fahrenheit 451. We now access facts. I mean, Bradbury couldn't have come up with this idea of a computer in your pocket. He would that Asimov would have come up with that idea. That was an Asimov idea.
Yeah.
And then Heinlein would have taken it to his logical conclusion. That's what that would have happened.
Here's a vehicle that does it for you.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. But we are mainlining facts and information, but with very few insights. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for insights. We're looking for the meaning behind the facts and the information. And so when you as a government apparatchik who are getting your regular check tell me what the meaning should be, I say, no, I don't want to hear from you. I really don't. I reject that, because to me that there's a thin line there that you're about to cross into the burning of the books. That's a thin line there between just telling. I'm just going to tell you which information is disinformation and which information is malinformation. I've started hearing about that more, and which information is well, that guy said it was fake, but we're telling you the real thing.
Yeah.
No, you're both saying the fake thing.
Yeah, you making news that someone else is lying to you is not the same thing as like giving me the truth. Right? Like, and like this is slightly tangential, but like I worked my tail off to build a pretty high wall between like myself and regular news, political news, because I can't change anything, right? And like Stoic idea, if you can't put your hands on it and change it, it's outside of your locus of control, and your time is better spent focusing on what is in your control, right? So it became very easy, but it was on the backside of frustration, because what I think that people are doing is that they don't want to go through the process of like having to figure it out for themselves. So it's easier to cling to
Yeah.
an identity of some way, shape, or form. And, that can be Christian, it can be military, it can be, the atheists that are out there swinging for the fences for their message and everything. Like, and then when it's close enough, people just go, oh, let it wash over me almost, right? And it's like, it's almost like you're getting baptized by this because you've just realized we agree on enough. I can just take your word for the rest of it. And
Right.
that's problematic thinking, right?
Yes. 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 And maybe this is a fundamental, and I will say this is a fundamental difference between me and maybe someone who might be a little bit more progressive than me. This is maybe revealing a little bit more of my conservative bona fides, but I tend to mistrust that more when it's coming from a public agency with police force behind it. Then
Oh, well,
I
yeah.
then I worry about maybe like, I don't know, Amazon.com, sending me fake information, whatever. By the way, yes, I understand Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. I'm not ignorant or naive, right? Like, but I don't have to buy the Washington Post. I always make this point. Amazon isn't sending out like, you know, police officers to make me buy stuff from them. Like they're
Agree.
not. But if I don't pay my taxes, cops
Yep.
going to show up at my house. Like that police force thing is really, really the defining line. Because
Hmm.
and we saw this with, you mentioned COVID, we saw this with COVID in certain places. The place that I came out of, we saw this, in places like, in other places around the world. I mean, the, the government apparatchiks in China were like welding people into their houses.
Yep.
Like, so that's police power. That's the power of life and death at the end of it.
Yeah.
No corporation, none, even the ones with the most rapacious lawyers on the planet.
I love your vocabulary, man. It makes me so happy every time I get to talk because like I know that I'm going to get like two or three new words that I'm like,
Rapacious, you like the word rapacious?
I've never heard that word before. I'm gonna have to go spend some time with it, and I'm so excited because it doesn't happen that often. So thank you.
It's think of like a honey badger crossed with like a wolverine just tearing through something. That's rapacious. Just
Heard. Yeah, I'm with you.
right,
Yeah.
right. Like, yeah, BlackRock may have private military contractors, but they can be stopped.
Yes.
No one's going to stop the ATF if they want to knock down my door with a no-knock warrant.
Oh, I have a version of this conversation with some friends of mine because I am more liberal than most people in our locale, right?
Sure.
Like, lumping in North Texas. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm pretty progressive just by comparison,
Sure.
But I think zoomed out, I'm left of center, but like
Mhm.
I'm not far left or anything.
Yeah.
But when I talk to some of my friends who were, very, I would say probably a little too enthusiastic about, weapons and
Yeah.
everything. And it always comes back down to this idea of like, well, what's that Benjamin Franklin quote? They
Oh,
take away the
yeah.
guns and everything. And I'm like, this is always where they go. And I'm like, you know, you would never even know if they decided to take you out.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, you
like,
would think that, but I would, the only pushback I would give on that is current events within the last summer have proven that the folks who should know how to take people out, I believe we're in a crisis of incompetency at all levels. Let's just say that.
well,
We can't.
and that brings up a good spin, but like I have friends who have, a smattering of pistols,
Sure.
right? And to them, they think that that's going to be the game changer,
Oh,
right?
well, yeah, those people are foolish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm sorry, right? If that is really your perspective, you're actually
Right.
going out and training. You're not just
Right.
hoarding and collecting so that way you feel tough in public.
Right.
You're actually going to
Exactly.
ranges. You're doing the thing. You're not
Yeah.
that far, so this is kind of like not real perspective. You're just looking for a reason to hold on to your idea. Because
Yeah.
like if they made that decision, they would make that decision and people would have problems with it, right? But and I'm not even saying that that is the solution. So before
No.
anybody ats me
No.
or
No. No.
comes after me or anything else like this, I'm not even against gun ownership. I think it
No.
should be harder to get a gun than it currently is. But I also think that if you decide to go through that idea, and you think that just owning the gun is enough, you're so fundamentally not on the
Yeah.
level
Yeah.
that you should probably not qualify for having that kind of weapon. Personal opinion.
Well, no. And I don't, as a person who is slightly to the right of center, I don't just based on my life experiences and things that I've seen,
Mm-hmm.
I don't disagree with that. And I would say that we need to be checking the Captain Beatties and the bureaucrats of the world using all the available tools we have before we go to those tools.
Agreed.
Um,
Sure.
I am also deeply troubled by the lack of faith by people of all across all political spectrums, whether you are the anarcho-libertarian on the right, or you're the socialist Marxist progressive on the left. I am deeply concerned by the lack of faith in our electoral of the not only electoral process, but also the what do you call it, solidity of our electoral process. Because I think if the belief in that system by regular people, I'm not talking about the weirdos who hang out and yell on the internet at each other. Those people
Mm-hmm.
are ridiculous. I'm talking about like one of my neighbors he owns a construction company in California, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's a regular dude. He didn't get past high school. Like he's a regular dude. And when he says to me, "Does my vote even matter?" That's a problem. That's a problem. Is
I
my vote
agree.
being counted? That's a problem. Like that guy has to have faith in the system because that guy gets up every day with the system just sort of running in the background. And what COVID did was it disrupted so much of that for people in general
I
who
would
had
agree with
never
that. Yeah.
had that disrupted for them before. And they didn't, the things that they thought were solid, and he's in his 60s now, but the things that they thought were solid for the majority of their adult life proved to be paper tigers.
Oh, well, I mean, welcome to the
And
party, guys. It was
right,
not as
right, right.
great as you thought it was.
Right. But if I'm a construction worker who didn't get past high school and I've done kind of okay for myself, right? But I never really had to think about it because I pay my taxes and I pay my employees. What do you want me to do? Like, and you've run across business owners like this.
Oh yeah.
Really, I gotta think about this thing now.
Yeah,
Like, really? you know? Um,
absolutely.
and those are the vast majority of people. And so the Captain Beatties of the world, I think, had a better understanding probably about 2 or 3 generations ago. And I think there has been an erosion. This is where I talk about the crisis of incompetency. But there's been an erosion over the course of time of the Captain Beatties of the world understanding that their job is to make sure that the system stays up without everybody ever noticing they were there.
Exactly. And
And I think that's what we've lost in the pursuit of everybody wanting to be famous on, like, Twitter
okay, I have a question
or
potentially.
X, whatever the hell it is
Yeah, whatever
now.
that is. It feels like on one level you're saying that Captain Beatty shouldn't be there, but then it also feels like you're now describing that there's a gap because we don't have people willing to be that. Let's just keep everything moving.
Right. No, I don't think Captain Beatty should be there.
Okay,
But if Captain Beatty is going to be there,
we need more
I
of them.
yeah, well, no. I would rather there not be. I'd say what at a deeper level, you talk about the words. I object to the arrogance and the hubris. That's what I would rather. If we're gonna have Captain Beatties all over the place, which to a certain degree, I guess we will. Fine. The number of them will vary. 10 or 100. I think they're all probably equal. From me, in my perspective, they're all equally bad. Get rid of all of them. But okay, if we're not, I would rather have 10 than 100. you know.
Sure.
Okay, fine. So 10 Captain Beatties that are humble, I will take over 100 Captain Beatties that are arrogant.
Oh man, yeah. I talk about this idea of being expectant, which is entitled, or being
Mm-hmm.
enabling, right? Because like I think that good leadership is enabling leadership. And it's so funny because I talk about just kind of like knowing what you need in the leadership for you to flourish, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot work under like a middle manager like Beatty.
Yeah.
Like I just can't because inside of that conversation, and this has just happened to me so many times now that I can see it for what it is. I'm gonna ask 3 to 4 questions, like looking for connection to other
Mm.
things. And these people don't have those kind of answers, right?
No.
And this was such a problem whenever I was a salesperson in bigger corporate structures where like my sales manager who came up on an ops path and has never been in a sales role ever is just like, well, you should just keep following up because you're the difference. Okay, explain to me how that works. John, I don't have time to answer all your questions. I just need you to go out and hit the goal because this should work. It's working. And I already know you're full of shit.
Mm.
Sorry, am I allowed to curse on here?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
You're fine.
And so, in that moment, once you show yourself to me that you don't either know why this is connected or why we're doing it, I can't even go with you. And I don't
Hmm.
know if this is me being a C. I don't know if this is me being prior service military and just having kind of like maybe ridiculously high standards for the people who want to be like my leader. But like as soon as I see that gap, I can't go with you, right?
Hmm.
And then this is part of the reason why I work for myself is because like I know that I'm going to run into that somewhere. And
Hmm.
then I turn and then I start becoming, well, let me go find all the other cracks, all the other
Yeah.
answers and everything else, right? And it's not good.
Let me
So,
start pulling that thread.
oh yeah, don't
See
pull
what
the threads.
unravels.
Don't pull the threads, right? Like, and honestly, if you're a curious person here, right?
Hmm.
Go figure out how to ask questions in a way so that way you can be heard the right way. Because half the time when I'm looking for these connection points, they take it as like I'm looking for answers,
Right.
right? And really, that's just how I communicate.
Right.
So I think it kind of goes back down to like a lack of leadership in the form of Beatty is just thinking like I'm just going to say this and it's going to work and then I'm going to leave and everything is just going to go back to normal,
Hmm.
right? Imagine how many other times he's given that same speech with how it's like talked about.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. He's like, oh well, and that's why, and I love it how Bradbury puts this. He has him like, or how he frames it. He has him lighting the lighter, and then blowing it out and lighting it, and the smoke just starts billowing up in the room. And it sort of put me in mind, weirdly enough, of the Wizard of Oz.
Interesting. Okay.
The wizard in the 1930s movie where Oz the Great and Terrible, and it's the smoke effects.
Yep.
And
Hmm.
so and of course, if you know anything about the Wizard of Oz, you know that the wizard was a flim flam man. The wizard was a scammer. He was selling a game.
Yep.
And I think Bradbury is subtly, for those who are paying attention, is subtly sort of intimating that this government apparatchik is pulling a game.
Hmm.
And he's doing it behind a smoke screen, you know. And that's a very powerful kind of idea there, which of course ties into the book burning and all the
Yeah.
other kind of elements. But it is operating at that secondary or maybe even tertiary psychological level in the book. And I don't know if that was intentional or if that was just something that he put in there as like, oh, this is going to be a good descriptor. This is how I'm framing it in my head. And sometimes you do that as a writer. You just write the framing that's in your head because the narrative drives you to a certain place.
Yep.
Stephen King talks about a lot about this in On Writing, where you start out thinking you're driving the car, and then it turns
Yeah.
out that you and the characters are switching, and now you're in the back and you're along for the ride.
I did some reading about his writing process because the way that he writes is very much he has an idea, he'll kind of he'll flush it out, but he kind of holds himself apart from it. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, okay, baby, it's typewriter time. So
Mm-hmm.
like I think I read, and I'm happy to be wrong, that he wrote this in 9 days,
Yes. Yes, he
right?
rented a typewriter for 10 cents an hour or something
10
like
cents
that.
an hour. Isn't that crazy? And like that idea of I know that I got to move quickly through this or else it's going to change. I
Mm-hmm.
think then creates that flow state of him being able to get like as deep into the books as he is, right? So like I think that they're tied together. But
Mm-hmm.
that thing blew me away as a guy who's been working on a second book for a lot longer than 9 days. And I'm still like trying to figure out exactly what this thing is going to be at the final end of it. But just that idea of like, I've got this idea, I'm going to hit it hard because he wants the character to take over the driving, right? He wants
Right.
to invest himself so fully in this character that like he can't even see it for himself whenever he's trying to put his finger on it and stuff like that. And like that
Yeah.
to me is such an interesting way to approach the entire process because like as a control freak, that's everything I don't want to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, and that's the difference, interestingly enough. Well, we're going to talk about this a little bit because we're going to talk about Faber. Let's talk about Faber.
Yes, please talk about Faber
Let's talk
because
about Faber.
I
Faber's sort of the counter Captain Beatty.
he is in when you sent over your notes for this show
Hmm.
and you talked about Faber,
Hmm.
immediate unique perspective because I was not seeing him the same way that you are talking about him, at least in the notes that you sent me. So I'm going to shut
Yes.
up and let you drive. Sorry.
Okay. All right. No, it's all right. So back to the book, back to Fahrenheit 451. Let's meet Faber, a man who's going to help out Mr. Montag. Faber sniffed the book. Do you know that books smell like nutmeg or some spice from a foreign land? I loved to smell them when I was a boy. Lord, there were a lot of lovely books once before we let them go. Faber turned the pages. Mr. Montag, you are looking at a coward. I saw the way things were going a long time back. I said nothing. I'm one of the innocents who could have spoken up and out when no one would listen to the guilty, but I did not speak and thus became guilty myself. And when finally they set the structure to burn books using the firemen, I grunted a few times and subsided, for there were no others grunting or yelling with me by then. Now it's too late. Faber closed the Bible. Well, suppose you tell me why you came here. Nobody listens anymore. I can't talk to the walls because they're yelling at me. I can't talk to my wife. She listens to the walls. I just want someone to hear what I have to say. And maybe if I talk long enough, it'll make sense. And I want you to teach me to understand what I read. Faber examined Montag's thin, blue jowled face. How did you get shaken up? What knocked the torch out of your hands? I don't know. We have everything we need to be happy, but we aren't happy. Something's missing. I looked around. The only thing I positively knew was gone was the books I'd burned in 10 or 12 years. So I thought books might help. You're a hopeless romantic, said Faber. It would be funny if it were not serious. It's not the books you need, it's some of the things that were once in books. The same things could be in the parlor families today. The same infinite detail and awareness could be projected through the radios and television, but are not. No, 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 no. It's not books at all you're looking for. Take it where you can find it in old phonograph records, old motion pictures, and in old friends. Look for it in nature and look for it in yourself. Books are only one type of receptacle where we stored a lot of things we were afraid we might forget. There's nothing magical in them at all. The magic is only in what books say, how they stitch the patches of the universe together into one garment for us. Of course, you couldn't know this. Of course, you still can't understand what I mean when I say all this. You are intuitively right. That's what counts. Three things are missing. Number one, do you know why books such as this are so important? Because they have a quality. And what does the word quality mean? To me, it means texture. This book has pores, it has features. This book can go under the microscope. You'd find life under the glass streaming past in infinite profusion. The more pores, the more truthfully recorded details of life per square inch you can get on a sheet of paper, the more literary you are. That's my definition anyway. Telling detail, fresh detail. The good writers touch life often. The mediocre ones run a quick hand over her. The bad ones rape her and leave her for the flies. So how now do you see why books are hated and feared? They show the pores in the face of life. The comfortable people only want wax moon faces, poreless, hairless, expressionless. We are living in a time when flowers are trying to live on flowers instead of growing on good rain and black loam. Even fireworks, for all their prettiness, come from the chemistry of the earth, yet somehow we think we can grow, feeding on flowers and fireworks without completing the cycle back to reality. Do you know the legend of Hercules and Antaeus, the giant wrestler whose strength was incredible so long as he stood firmly on the earth? But when he was held rootless in midair by Hercules, he perished easily. If there isn't something in that legend for us today, in this city, in our time, then I am completely insane. Well, there we have the first thing I said we needed: quality, texture of information. And the second, leisure. Oh, well, we've got plenty of off hours. Off hours, yes, but time to think? If you're not driving 100 miles an hour at a clip when you can't think of anything else but the danger, then you're playing some game or sitting in some room where you can't argue with the four-wall televisor. Why? The televisor is real. It is immediate. It has dimension. It tells you what to think and blasts it in. It must be right. It seems so right. It rushes you on so quickly to its own conclusions, your mind hasn't time to protest. What nonsense. Only the family is people. I beg pardon. My wife says books aren't real. Thank God for that. You can shut them. Say, hold on a moment. You play God to it. But who has ever torn himself from the claw that encloses you when you drop a seed in a TV parlor? It grows you in any shape it wishes. It is an environment as real as the world. It becomes and is the truth. Books can be beaten down with reason, but with all my knowledge and skepticism, I have never been able to argue with a 100-piece symphony orchestra, full color, 3 dimensions, and being in and part of those incredible parlors. As you see, my parlor is nothing but 4 plaster walls, and here, he held out 2 small rubber plugs, for my ears when I ride the subway jets. Denham's dentifrice, they toil not, neither do they spin, said Montag, eyes shut. Where do we go from here? Would books help us? Only if the third necessary thing could be given to us. Number 1, as I said, is quality of information. Number 2, leisure to digest it. And number 3, the right to carry out the actions based on what we learned from the interaction of the first 2. And I hardly think a very old man and a fireman turned sour could do much this late in the game. Here at the end of the 4th turning in the United States of America, the hour is indeed late. Or at least from my perspective, it's late. John's mileage may vary. Your mileage may vary. Faber, and this is the leap that I made in my brain that captivated John that I put in the notes. Faber is Montag's Morpheus, but he isn't a cool black dude. He's not a cool black savior character. And he's flawed as a hero because books make us complicated, which is what the systems that Captain Beatty represented understood. They didn't want complication. They wanted flat wax. And by the way, wax is manipulable when you heat it. Structures. The builders that were holding together civilization's memory along the train tracks outside the city also understood this. And eventually, Montag will run into them as well on the escape from the rapacious, there's that word again, hordes in the city. Faber, at the end, doesn't have a happy ending. Matter of fact, Faber has no ending, weirdly enough. Bradbury just sort of abandons him in the middle of the third, well, not the middle, sort of the back end of the 3rd act of the book. Yeah. And it's kind of odd. I've never seen a writer do that. It's sort of like the inverse of Anton Chekhov's gun. This idea that you like just leave something there.
I had completely forgotten about how the book wraps up.
Yeah.
So like I knew the premise, right? You're not allowed to have books, right? And someone wakes up, but the ending was very interesting, right? Because like all of a sudden I realized that I don't remember how this book ends, right? The story. And I'm like, we're so close to the end. Like, is this just the wake up? Is there any lasting change? And then I was like, oh, now I'm very excited because I'd forgotten how to do it. And you're right. Like there's a lot of hope, right? That, they're going to meet up in the future, but there's also a lot of reason to assume that hope is not valid.
Right. There's no denouement. There's no conclusion. There's no catharsis at the end.
Yeah, it feels like as I was reading it, I was like, God, this just feels kind of rushed at the end of it. And then, thinking about it is like, this is about change. This is about the wake up. This is about all of these things, right? And if you're going through it, you have no idea what the ultimate conclusion is going to be like. You know what I'm saying? So initially I was like, this feels rushed. I don't like this. I want more details. I want to know how everyone wraps up, and I just want to have clarity at the end of it. And then I kind of had to slow down and like pause and realize like, hey, it doesn't have to end the way that I want it to end for it to be a good story, which was, a very interesting part as I'm reading this book and wanting it to like wrap up my way, and then it doesn't wrap up my way, and I'm a little bit frustrated for a couple of minutes,
Well, I think there's one possibility. I think Bradbury probably would have accepted this. The possibility exists that Faber was evaporated in the bombs.
No, I know.
The city.
But like that whole thing, I don't really feel like they do a good job of really talking about how like this country's on the constant verge of war until he's meeting with Faber, until like we're like at that midpoint, right?
Well, no. The women, no. The scene with the women in the parlor when Montag goes nuts and he starts yelling at them about their lives and about their kids.
Hmm.
And the one woman, she's on her what, like third marriage or whatever, and she's like joking about how he's going off to war because there's a perpetual war and they're not going to get married, or they're not going to exchange names because he's just going to get vaporized or something like that, basically.
Oh, it was so funny because during that exchange, I was just so focused on the idea of like kids
Mm-hmm.
and like the kid
Oh
element
yeah.
inside of there of like, why would you ever have kids? Well, it's just a cesarean, and like that to me was like shocking and kind of like removed enough that that's where all my focus went. I didn't even see that for the initial kind of like ground laying of the war that then ties into the third act stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting to me. But this idea that
Well, and the girl at the beginning, Claire, who doesn't make it, right?
yeah. Mhm.
Um,
And
there's also an
also
intimation,
maybe she did.
and maybe she did. There's an intimation there that warfare is going on,
Yeah, that's fair.
but it's one of those things because Montag isn't awake yet. So he's
Hmm.
still walking through sort of this, oh, I just put out the fires and then I go home and there's the walls and da 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 da.
Yep.
And it's all and it's and it's interesting how Bradbury steps him down into the being awake piece, ironically enough, or maybe interestingly enough, with his wife getting her stomach pumped from the sleeping pills that she OD'd on,
Yeah.
and the people who show up to pump her stomach. And you talk about the cesarean. I was sort of taken out a little bit, and it's very hard to take me aback. It really is. Um, but I was sort of taken aback by the casualness with which
Same.
Bradbury described them showing up and just sort of, oh, they're just gonna have a cigarette. It's just another,
Well, I
you
mean,
know,
like,
standing and why. We'll go to the next one. It's fine. And that casualness with human life.
yeah,
Um,
I think it does the opposite, honestly. It shocked me how like early it was and just how stark it was, right? He just
mhm.
walks home and finds this thing out. But to me, them coming along and them being so nonchalant about it, to me, that really sets the stage for like the environment that like this is so common. Oh yeah, here's another one. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And we go through versions of that and like not to that extreme, but like
Well, there are people who would assert that even in our own time. I mean, Bradbury wrote this book in the 50s and 60s, right?
mhm.
But in our own time, there are people who would assert that we are too casual with life. But by the way, cradle to grave. It doesn't matter what context we're in. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about the death penalty or the third rail issue of abortion or whatever. Anything involving life, we're way too casual about. Anything involving um the transmutation of life into something else, right?
Yeah,
There are people who would assert, and I do think they have a valid point, that we are not, and it's really they use the term too casual. I think what they're looking for is we lack seriousness. It lacks our conversations lack. There's a Hebrew word.
finality.
There's a Hebrew word in the Bible called in the Old Testament called kabod, right? It's used to describe the patriarch Abraham, right? He
Mm,
had kabod. And what we translate that into in English is gravitas. He had weight, right? And when a person like that speaks, it doesn't matter how much you shut up and listen.
agreed. Yeah.
And we've all run into people like that.
Hmm.
And there are people who would make the assertion that in the kinds of conversations we are having around life and that we've had with increasing intensity around life, those people with that type of gravitas are not involved in the conversation. And so we are having unserious, casual conversations, which cheapens life. Um, and I think there is a point there. And so I can see where, and even with me seeing that intellectually, it still hit me like, oh, this is the emotion of it.
Yeah.
This is the emotion of these guys just being like, oh, well, this woman may die, she may not. I don't know. I gotta go down the street. Let's pack up our crap and go down the street.
It was so like cold
Yeah.
and it was so early, but I was like, this is the world. This is the world that we're in. And for me, it was like a very interesting pace setter,
Yes.
that also starts to him to kind of think and, outside the box and everything. Um, okay,
Now,
but
comparing him to Morpheus and the Black Savior piece, which I know that kind of struck you a little bit. Why did that, you're like,
well,
oh, I
because
hadn't thought
like
of that that way.
the question you said is like, is Faber a good leader?
Yeah. Is he
Right?
a favorite? Is he a good leader? Yeah.
And it's so funny because like as I was reading it, he's so apologetic, right? I'm the coward, right? I'm sending you to go do these things and I'm not doing them myself. On one hand, and I didn't realize this until this conversation, so thank you for this perspective, is like I was like, God, like this guy is just a doormat. Okay. But what if he's just manipulating him from the other side? Because you have Faber on one side, you have you know Beatty in the other, and he's just there in the middle. Like, what if he is just like that good of a manipulator and not really that much of a coward? And I wasn't thinking about that until I saw that and we're
Mhm.
having this conversation because like I just thought he was just like this like kind of, this is gonna sound bad, but like a guy who's too nerdy and he's missed
Yeah.
his opportunity to speak up, and so now he needs someone who's got some brute strength amongst him or around him
Oh, yeah.
to like cause change. But he's so always with the but like, hey, you're the real hero here. I'm the, you know what I'm saying? And
Hmm.
like there is a realm to where like if you're good at motivational manipulation,
Hmm.
it's all there, right? The negging and the oh well, blah blah blah. But then he's also, the thing that I really loved is when they're talking about Beatty and he's like, maybe he's one of us and we just don't know it yet. And that blew my mind, man. I was like, oh
Right. Well,
crap.
there was a scene, and I read about it, I think, in my research on the book. But Bradbury was going to put in a scene where Beatty had like books in his living room or something, but they were all like burned up books on bookshelves
Oh, interesting.
that he'd like charred or whatever. And he decided not to put that in the book. And maybe it was in an interview he talked about it, or maybe something. I don't know. Anyway, because he wrote several different introductions to Fahrenheit 451, and I would strongly recommend, if you're going to read this book, go back and read the edition that has at least a couple of his introductions, because it's interesting how he changed over the course of his life subsequent to the book, and changed his perspective on sort of where the book landed, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I want to revisit something that you said in the first part, which I don't think I fully addressed. You'd say, yes, my opinion about banning books in libraries, right?
Well,
Um,
I think the question is, I think it's very easy for people to be like, oh yeah, we shouldn't ban books, but like my kid's not reading this stuff. You
sure.
know what I'm saying? Which in summation is kind of the same thing, right? If you're the
Well,
parental figure and you're holding your kids apart from it, you don't have a police state to come in there and like force it and everything, but in all intents and purposes, you might as well be.
well, I think there's a bunch of different dynamics happening underneath there. First off, you've got parents who are not, for whatever multifaceted, multimotive reasons, are not actually paying attention to what's going on in their kids' heads, much less their kids' lives. They're just not. They're not dialed in. I think something like less than half, and it might be even higher than that now, of all families don't have at least one meal together at night
Over what, like a week or a month?
over like a week. Just don't have it.
It's
They just don't,
crazy.
because they're. And by the way, there are seasons in my life. I'll be perfectly transparent on this. Like, I'm currently in a season where we are struggling to have a meal together every night, because like just schedules and all this other kind of stuff, right? Because we added one more thing in, and then everything went to hell. The whole entire schedule went off the table. But it's okay, because it's only for 8 weeks. It's only the one thing for 8 weeks, and it's done, right? And then
Yeah.
we'll be back to sort of some sense of, for us, normalcy. But I try to have meals with my kids like every night of the week, because how else am I going to find out what's going on with my kids? Right. Now, are there other ways? Can I have other conversations? Sure. Okay. But that idea of the traditional communal table that everybody gathers around and we exchange ideas about our day without, by the way, don't get to bring a cell phone to the table. We're not bringing distractions. You're actually going to look at another human being over a meal and like have a conversation with them. The vast majority of people are not doing that. So if a parent is not doing that with it, I would assert that a parent's not doing that with their child on a regular or semi-regular basis, you actually probably don't have a good clue of what's going on in your kid's head. That's number one. And then
Sure.
number two, the second dynamic, and this was actually not a point made by me, it's been a point made by others. I'm just repeating it. Um, you complain about the cell phones, but you're the one as the parent that paid for the plan. You're the
Uh,
one that put the iPhone 4 in that kid's hand. That 14-year-old doesn't have a job. That 12-year-old ain't going out and paying the $200 a month cell phone bill. You're the one that put the crack cocaine in the kid's hand.
yeah.
Stop putting the crack cocaine in the kid's hand. Oh, well, but, oh, well, but. There's all these oh, well, buts. I don't want to hear about your oh, well, buts. I came from when my mama had to pick me up. This is directly out of my experience. My mama had to pick me up from an extracurricular activity. If I had to be sitting my behind on the sidewalk waiting for my mama to come pick me up, guess what? Because my mama forgot, and there were times my mama forgot.
Same. Yeah.
Like, and I didn't die. By the way, did I inconvenience other adults? Sure. Did they all look at her like she was inconveniencing them? Absolutely. Did my mama care? Hell no. She didn't care. She's like, I'm making money. What are you making? Like, you eat my food. What? Be quiet, get in the car.
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
that's the very specific perspective that so I got to be very clear on that, right? I get it. Other people had other experiences, yada, yada, yada. Okay. We
Yeah.
have two generations of hand-on parenting, and now we're doing this thing called gentle parenting. I don't know what the hell that is. My point is that if you're not engaged with the kid, and then you're giving the kid technology that's basically, according to Jonathan Haidt, and he's not incorrect, again, mainlining dopamine into your kid's system from a very early age when they can't even handle it. I mean, Snapchat is marketed to 8-year-olds. Okay. And I've been on that
Remember,
platform.
you remember when it was like a porn platform? It was just
Oh
for
my
like
God.
sending and it's so funny because it's not that anymore, but because I was an adult when it came out,
Yeah.
like there for a while when it was like becoming like a social media platform and brands
Mm-hmm.
were on there and everything, and I was like, what is like I
What
was
are we
so
doing?
stuck in the old conjecture that like I wasn't able to kind of see that they were trying to shift it and do something different with it, you know?
Right. Yeah.
But
Um,
yeah.
but when you have that, and that's and then you're going to outsource your kids to, and I don't think you and I have ever talked about this on the podcast, but me and my wife, we try to homeschool our kids. Not try, we homeschool our kids, and we've been doing that for many, many years before it was cool. Like, we've got systems in place, all that, right? This is part of the reason why we have tons of books in our house. We're bibliophiles, right? But the point is, you're outsourcing your kid for 8 hours a day to somebody else who's putting ideas in their heads.
Yep.
And you only have 2 to 4 hours a day. And by the way, if you're not eating a meal with them, you have less time than that to counteract those ideas or to just offer an alternative perspective. Forget counteract, just offer an alternative perspective.
Mhm.
And by the way, you're going to do that for 12 years. Those three ingredients, just by themselves in the pot, are enough. And this is where the banned books comes in now, are enough for me to question you yelling and screaming about books in a library. Work on those three things first, and then you can worry about books in a library. Books in the
Well,
library are they're the last. Please
no, I
stop.
agree with you, right? Like,
What are we doing?
but the perspective is, well, I'm paying money for these schools, so therefore they should, but no one shows up to school board meetings to talk about the curriculum.
Yeah, please,
You know what
nobody.
I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's very much this, we all want what we want, but we're not very good at the follow through to actually make it like actually happen, right? And
Right.
you know, the thing you said about like the family dinner and everything, like part of me is wants to push back and be like, it doesn't need to be a dinner, right? It needs to be intentional time, right?
Okay.
And I think, right, and this is not to kind of like judge you or anything else like that,
No,
but
no, it's fine. Go ahead.
like I think it's very easy to be like, okay, we're all coming together at dinner and blah blah blah, and then kids get busy, and then we're just mad about the sanctity of dinner not being what it once was, as opposed to like trying to take the action of like going and having those conversations wherever you can have them because we prioritize them as important,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So
I am also one of those people who says, and I want to be intellectually and emotionally consistent on this. You have to do what fits in the context of your life. That's why we have a
Agreed.
republic, right? Okay. Um, it's not my job to cast aspersions, not judgment, cast aspersions on whatever it is you may happen to be doing. It's also not your job to feel guilt about whatever you may happen to be doing or not be doing. It's your job
Oh
to kind
yeah.
of look at the thing that you're doing and okay. And then the other dynamic is, and this is something that I think a lot of people who are parents struggle with, particularly younger parents, struggle with this. I'm not in a, I have not raised my children, and I am not personally parenting in a war against other parents. I'm not in a competition. I'll frame it that way. I'm not in a competition
Yeah.
against other parents. Whatever you want to do, you do. However, the things that I do with my kids are going to be the things that I'm going to advocate for.
For
They
sure.
just
For
don't.
sure.
They're just going to
Yeah.
be those things,
Like,
right?
you know,
And and when we talk about things like books, or we talk about things like larger ideas, you're talking about intentional time. Sure, if you're taking intentional time to talk about stoicism with your kid, cool. Let's take that additional time. Let's figure out what that focused time is and really be intentional about doing that.
mhm.
I do think that we do have a long, not I think I know, we have a long history in the West where we can trace yes, we could trace the transmission of culture to certain traditional acts that occur first at a family level and then are usually scaled up to a nation state level. And by the way, Jewish people, I'll use them as a perfect example. Very strong traditions around Friday Sabbath and Friday meals.
Mhm.
Um, and that's the thing that has transmuted that belief system, across destructions of temples and damn near destructions of people for 5,000 years. Traditions work. And I think one of the things we're struggling with right now in the West is with the atomization of life and the allowing of these other systems to come in and atomize us and break us down into our smallest bits, which are, of course, the individual, and then even smaller than that. It also atomizes away the traditions. And it just kind of blows those up.
Mhm.
And human beings don't do really well in general without traditions, and children in particular don't do really well without traditions. There has
Yeah.
to be some sort of cultural transmission process here. Now, books
Mhm.
are a way to do
Passing of
it,
knowledge for sure.
right? And how are we going to do that intentionally in our family based on the context of whatever it is we're doing? So, and that may sound like a giant justification for what I just said, but it's not.
Well, no, I just think it's important to because I could see fast forwarding, right? And my daughter's a little bit older and she's got
Sure.
extracurricular stuff and then being pissed that she's not prioritizing dinner because
Yeah.
this is our time, you know? Whereas like I think that parents, if you want to be part of your kids' lives, you need to be intentional and insert yourself in the kids' lives as opposed to expecting them to, you know, effortlessly include you in everything.
Sure. And I think you also have to understand that. And again, this is probably how I was raised. The hierarchical structure, whatever, because there was a structure, and where are you at in the hierarchy, right? And so, you know, is the person that you're raising these kids with, are they on the same page that you are on?
Oh, yeah.
You
That's a
right.
whole other
And that's a
conversation.
whole other conversation, right? So it's about it's about fighting the appropriate, not fighting, I shouldn't say that. It's about negotiating. That's really what it is. You'll appreciate this as a salesperson. It's about negotiating in the appropriate way, in the appropriate manner, with the appropriate person at the appropriate time, and knowing where the negotiations go, right? And
Yeah.
getting alignment as much as possible. Is there going to be times of misalignment? Are there going to be seasons of disruption and of chaos? For sure. But that can't be the whole life of the child. That can't be the whole life of the
Oh,
family,
I agree. 100% agree.
you know?
Uh, God, like there's so many tangents I could take this conversation down from that just
Just from that alone.
basic idea, right? Because
Yeah,
people also have a habit of rubbing off on each other, right, in close
correct.
proximity, right? Like part of the
Yes.
reason that the military works is you're all in the same boat, right? You've all made this decision and you all have to deal with the outcome, and you're learning how to become the machine that the government thinks that they might need to call on,
Right.
and like that's always there but no one's really talking about it and stuff. But Yeah, man. And then, you get married, you start spending time with someone, and just like we were talking about before, well, this influencer, this person knows A, B, and C just like I do. So therefore, you know, D through Z, we're probably
Totally.
as well.
Well,
We're probably
yeah,
on the same page,
we're
right?
probably fine.
And
Except the challenge is like D and C, you're not on the same page, and probably looking at that influencer for advice about how you should live your life is
exactly,
probably
exactly, right? But A was solid. A was solid, right? B's maybe 80% aligned, but then we get to C and it's like 25%. Well, Jordan Peterson says this thing, so I'm gonna go do it this way. And
yeah.
it's like, you've missed the opportunity to have your own critical conversations with yourself, right?
Bingo. And those critical thinking skills come from.
Exactly. And man, like I love getting to come and do these episodes with you because like I read these books and I always know that after the conversation, I'm still mostly gonna feel the way that I feel about it. But
Mhm,
like because I have deep trust for you and I know that you're a thoughtful person,
mhm.
I have some new perspective that I didn't have before. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I love so much about the second point. We need leisure,
Hmm.
right? If you're running from book to book to book to book to book to book, and you're never sitting and thinking like, what did I get from this?
Hmm.
You're missing 9/10 of the point, right? And so
Right.
it's funny you see these online social media things of like, well, I read 52 books. How much are you synthesizing, bro? Right? And that's always the solution, right? I read a lot, I mean, I don't read as much as Melissa does. Melissa reads about 50 books a year, but
Hmm.
it's her number one pastime is reading.
Hmm.
But I probably read 15 to 20, sometimes 30, depending upon the year.
Hmm.
But I'm also because of what I do, like able to like, let's go try this and let's go try this and let's go try this, right? And it's funny because I met up with a friend of mine that I know digitally. He's an entrepreneur. We met in an entrepreneurial community. We've only been friends digitally, right? But
Hmm.
last year he sells to like airports and everything, like billion
Oh,
dollar
okay.
deals, right?
Yeah.
So he's in town. We meet up last year as I'm going through the process of buying the house and everything. And then he came back in town this year. He had to follow up with a client and everything. And so we met up again and we were talking again. And it was so funny because he pauses and he was like, dude, like, how long has it been since we saw each other? And I was like, oh, I did the math actually. It's been this long, because that's who I am. And he was like, you are miles away different than where you were a year ago.
Hmm.
And I kind of had this moment of like, duh, like why wouldn't I be, right? I'm on this path. I'm pushing myself. I'm challenging my ideas. Like I'm like, helping people think about how they think, of course that's going to kind of wash over onto me. So, but it was this like very weird moment of realizing most people don't change that much over a decade,
Oh, yeah.
you
No.
know?
Yeah.
So that whole thing of like I'm looking for things to implement. I'm looking for things to change and to try and to dole out and to see how it works and everything else like this. And because my job is what it is, I get the opportunity to be like, oh, well, that sounds like an interesting anecdote. Let me go tell someone
Right.
about it in relation to this other thing and see how they deal with it. And then when they show up later and they're like, oh, that what, I told people I was rereading this book. And they're
Hmm.
like, oh, what's that book about? I've never read it before. And I'm like, it's about a future with no books. And then I can just leave it,
Yeah.
right? And then
Yep.
and then they'll like, okay, how's the book coming? Like, oh man, pretty good, right?
Hmm.
So I get this opportunity to, and this is back to the true grit thing. You can have the
Hmm.
map, but that's not the same thing as being in the territory,
Right.
right? And like I'm in the territory all the time with people that are dealing with changes of their own perception around leadership and sales and marketing and positioning and spin. And are we spinning for the right reasons? Are we spinning negatively? Are we telling them just what we think that they want to hear? Or are these things actually connected to the things we want to build? Like, and there's so much in
Hmm.
this as like I'm curious as to your perspective on this as someone who works with individuals and helps
Hmm.
kind of
Yeah.
crack them open, if you will, because like I think on some level, like I'm trying to wake people up. I'm trying to get them to stop thinking about, yeah, you can
Yeah.
just walk in the room and push hard enough and they're going to say yes. Because like even if you can, let's talk about what happens after that. They ghost you,
Right.
they stall, they churn, all these things that are bad. But like we're all just happy that we like got our way. And it's like, guys, like think about the connective tissue here,
Hmm.
so it's very interesting as I'm going through, like, I do get to take these ideas and play with them and try to kind of get other people to think about them and stuff like that. Do you see that in your work, or did that not
Oh
really show up
yeah.
for you as you were thinking about the book?
Oh yeah. I mean, so one of the things that's very interesting to me is I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I won't obviously get into names or relationships, but I was having a conversation with I was having a conversation with someone the other day about how their one of their intimate relationships is in the process of being redefined. Well, hopefully that's neutral enough
Hmm.
and not redefined in a positive direction, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And the conversation was very intimate. There were a lot of details in there that were dropped. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that before. I didn't know that before. I didn't know that before. And I've known this person for a little while, but now we've reached a certain level of trust where he can kind of have this conversation with me. Okay, cool. And I wound up, he didn't really ask for my advice. He was just really just looking to kind of just like
Dump.
document dump and then move
Hmm.
on. But there were things that were in the conversation that we were having that I thought he was missing that were critical. And I literally said, hold on, like I gotta give you advice here, whether you want to hear it or not. Like I really do, because you're skipping like a rock over some
Huh.
of this stuff, and you're missing the deeper thing here. And I went back to a couple of books that I've been reading, over the course of this year, right? And a couple of conversations where not just with you but with other hosts that I've had, where we distilled out some ideas that I thought would be helpful for him, and I kind of gave those ideas to him, and then I tied that into sort of my personal life experience around some of the areas that are similar to him, right? And in the book that I'm writing right now, the one I'm mashing around with that I can't get out of, the book is being driven by these conversations. So these kinds of conversations I'm having with you are driving the book, right?
Yeah.
It's not a book based on the podcast, but it's a book based on the conversations that I've been able and the critical thinking that I've been able to put behind, coming up with these ideas and these ways into these books. Like one of the things that I do with these books is I try to find a way in. Like, what's the way in here?
Agreed. Yeah.
Right. And so the way into True Grit was sort of thinking about what does a character look like who is claiming moral authority, and is just rigidly committed to that moral authority, and she ain't gonna move off her rock, you know.
Yeah.
Maddie Ross says at some point, and it might have been in the movie too, nothing's free by the grace of God. You have to pay for everything in this world, and she was fine with paying her price. Where do you run into someone like that, like ever in the world today now? Like, where do you run into somebody that's like that, just that rigidly committed? Many people that
I
I run into are loosey goosey. I run into a lot of loosey goosey people who are kind of flopping all over the place. Now, again, your mileage will probably vary.
Yeah. I okay. Whew. This is one of my favorite topics, right? Because in
Right.
in the
Well, and I want to draw that in comparison to a guy like Captain Beatty, who I run into a lot of the Captain Beatties,
oh yeah.
a lot of those folks, and those people drive me absolutely crazy. But go ahead.
I can't deal with the Captain Beatties, right? And so if
Yeah.
I hear anything about like, well, we're just going to get rid of these people and get new people, and that's going to fix the problem, I'm like, no, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 no.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm forced to turn. See, the Maddie Rosses drive the Captain Beatties crazy,
100% for sure. That's the
but
that's
they're
the
both
whole
sides of the
crux of
same
it.
coin. That's the
100,
idea.
like that's the other greatness of the whole thing, right? But in the kung fu school, one night, I was lamenting that like people don't do kung fu, right?
Mm-hmm.
But really, I was wrapping it up in the idea that people don't have lives because
Right.
they just finish work and they go home and they sit on the couch and they drink beer and they watch TV, right? And I'm over here and I'm doing a thing, right? And like I was drinking too much of the Kool-Aid at the time, right? You kind of have to in those environments, or else you don't get the good stuff, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my friends, still friends with him, he goes, man, everyone has kung fu, but for most people, that kung fu is watching TV, right?
There you go.
And
Yeah.
I know people, and you know people that watch
Oh yeah.
UFC fights, and they can name off every one of those moves. They know exactly what's happening. Like, and you and I also both know that being able to name those names is not going to help
Means
them
nothing.
against an 8-year-old. You know what I'm saying? So I think what has happened is you do see those people, right? You see black belts in jujitsu. That takes a level of like, nah, not going your way.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
business
Yeah.
ownership, right? You know, I can't tell you, and this is going to sound so bad, I can't tell you how many people can't seem to figure out how to be productive for their own intrinsic needs and to do it consistently enough that they can have a business,
Yeah.
right? So they're almost like, oh my God, I hope I can spin up this business before I get bored. And it's almost like they know about it, which is very just interesting to me because I
Yeah.
do think it takes a little bit of like, no, screw you, watch me go do this thing to do
Right.
any of these things.
Yes.
And I think that's Matty Ross. It's just
Yeah.
not as, what's the word? It's not as,
Concentrated, maybe.
it's
Because
not
Portis is trying to build an archetype. That's the other thing about these
100% for
books. You know,
sure.
these authors are trying to build archetypes, right? So there's
Yep.
an archetype of Captain Beatty. There's an archetype of Matty Ross.
Hmm.
Um, there's an archetype of, we read War and Peace, one of our more downloaded episodes this year.
Hmm.
Just the first part of it, just like the first introduction. And it is a master class in how to do business networking. It's a master class in how to go to a party,
Interesting.
but it's a Russian party.
I need to go back and read that.
Yeah, go back and read like the first like 5 chapters. It is a master class in how to network. It's a
Interesting. Thank
master
you.
class in how to run a networking event, right? And the way that Tolstoy describes Anna Pavlovna going through and like making sure everybody's talked to and everybody's got them engaged with the other.
Huh.
But it's old school aristocratic 19th century politeness
Yeah.
that we have just totally blown up and abandoned. We had a whole conversation about that on our podcast too, kind of similar to the one that we had about Way of the Samurai, but in a a more Western context.
But man, I
But that's
like,
the archetypes that these authors are building, or archetypes. I'm sorry.
so one of my big shifts around networking was around this idea. Like I hated small talk, right?
Yeah.
And my coach was always like, and I was going to a sales coach so that way I could be a brass tacks type and not
Okay.
have to small talk, right? Completely holding it with the wrong intention,
Sure.
right? And my coach was like, you know what? You don't have to learn all this stuff if you just play with people who were like good to play with, right? And he's like even trying to
Mhm.
put it in my vernacular as a poker player so that way I can understand it. And I'm still like, what? You know, and he's like, don't try to sell people that don't want what you got, idiot. You know, but I wasn't
Right.
clear enough to see any of that stuff at the time. But I network a lot now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Lunch Club, which is a AI driven matchmaking service for networking. I've
Yep.
had 300 meetings alone on that platform. And the trick, the trick, if you will, the my goal is I'm trying to find your kung fu, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so people come on the thing, and I'm not like, well, how's your week going? What's the most exciting? Tell me about a time when you struggled in your work. I'm like, what do you do on the weekends? What do you do when you're not working, right? And then, and I'm going somewhere with this because Kung Fu is a craft, Jiu-Jitsu is a craft, writing is a craft, sales is also a craft. But if we don't have this conversation, there's no way they're going to be able to see it as a craft unless they come from the territory kind of
Right.
situation.
Yeah.
So what I have found is the craziest depths of like community and passion and drive. Like I talked to a guy who had 7 Cantina racer motorcycles inside of his garage because like that is his kung fu. That is his jam. And he spent all of his improvement time, his development time, his meditative time, his Kaizen time, if you will, on that. And I've met more and more people that have odd hobbies, right? And I'm saying this as someone who often gets looked at for having the weirdest hobbies on the planet, right? Like martial arts and poker and these things. I get it, but it's only weird because you don't do it,
Right.
right? And so I think that people have these drives to where they can be that driven and that oriented and stuff. I just don't think that people see it for what it is, right? People are scared to turn their hobby into their livelihood for all the reasons that make sense, right?
Right.
There's lots of people like I had to have this conversation with someone else of God, do you really want to carry that much weight for someone else's thing? Because you might just be someone who's better off working on your own. So that way you can
Right.
have the wider lane and stuff. And we all need different things, but I think there's drive for everybody. You just have to kind of like look for where you're already driven and pull the elements away from like what makes you drive there and instill those in this other thing. And then it's easier to drive.
Well, and I think, and we gotta wrap
Yeah,
up.
we're way off on the
We're
tip. But hey,
way off.
surprise, guys, if you listen to the other ones, you knew this was going to happen, right? Congratulations. Everybody drink, take a shot.
well, one of the and this well that actually ties into where we're gonna go towards at the end here. So one of the things that I'm sort of starting to noodle with, another idea of sort of starting to noodle with, and I'll do it through the science fiction books because we're going to read Dune here. Dune's coming up.
Mm,
I'm finally on the back end of Dune.
mm,
Well, I
mm.
found a person who's really passionate about Dune, like really passionate
Oh,
about Dune. So
I wish it was me because like my wife is like a Dune fanatic, and I'm just
maybe I should
like,
talk to her.
you
Maybe you
should
should have
talk to
her.
her. Like when I finally read it, because I read it late, I didn't read it
Yeah.
as a kid, right? And so then reading it late, I was like, oh, this is the same Messiah story that I've just seen over and over and over. And she's like, no, it's the Messiah story. And I'm like, no, it's not.
No.
You know? But like that idea, right, talking about writing and everything, and I got kind of got stuck on my book, so I dug into Brandon Sanderson's lectures on
Oh
creative
yeah.
writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Phenomenal stuff. And the thing that he says in there that blew my mind is that it's always a cliche until you do it so well that people forget that it's a cliche.
Right. Ooh,
And
that's like some Robert McKee level stuff right
oh
there.
man, I was like, oh, I'm so glad I'm watching these free YouTube videos. Like I could be watching cat memes, but this is inherently more. Um,
This is better.
but
But
yeah,
I think when the idea in science fiction is that tomorrow, not well, no, I've been playing with a couple ideas in my shorts episodes. First off, that most science fiction, particularly dystopian science fiction, even utopian science fiction, but let's talk about the dystopians because we always like those better.
oh yeah,
Dystopian science fiction is a reflection of whoever the author is, their current anxieties or whatever moment they're writing it. It
100%.
just is. And a buddy
Mhm.
of mine actually told me that years ago, and I was like, you're full of crap. No, actually, turns out he was correct. I was wrong. He was right. Okay, he'll be happy to hear this. Um, we have that kind of relationship. He'll be happy to hear this. But the layer that's on top of it, which is why, by the way, Star Trek can never really fully be replicated. And I don't believe it fully can be. I think the Paramount will always continue to screw that property up for a very specific reason. And the specific reason is that Gene Roddenberry created something that went against the anxieties of his era. And he went into positive direction. And it's really hard to do a positive. It's easier to do a negative. That's why you have so many dystopians or
Fair.
dystopias versus utopias. Anyway.
And like it's perfect except this one big, huge, glaring hole. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, we're all just jaded.
I was just jaded. Exactly. Yep. But when you look, oh, I got that. I heard you.
I know you did.
One of the things that's interesting to me, and I think about it in the context, I mean, you have kids, I have kids. I think
Mhm.
about it in the context of our children, is what do we owe? What do the people living now owe the people that are yet to be born? What do we owe? Because there will be people tomorrow. This is like, and maybe it's a thing where I'm starting to really comprehend my own mortality now, in my mid 40s. But
Mhm.
there will be a time when Hasan Sorrells and John Hill and all of the other hosts that I have, co-hosts that I've had on my show, our voices will no longer be in the world. They just won't be there anymore. And yes, the internet, to riff off of Ronald Reagan a little bit, the internet might be like a government program. It might be the closest thing that we have to immortality. Which, I don't know that I want my voice, and I know the AI is coming along. I don't know that I want my voice resurrected with my old, podcast episodes so that people can hear. I don't know that I want that.
Weird.
I'm sort of struggling. I'm sort of struggling with the idea of that right now. But the concept, even deeper than that, is if I just put out pablum, then pablum is going to influence the future. So there's
Yes,
not real
I agree.
wisdom there, right? So if I put out wisdom, then wisdom will influence the future, right? So what do I owe people who I will not meet? Because at best, if I live to be 100 years old, which by the way, I consider middle age to be 50, middle age meaning the middle of between you're born and you die. So
Yeah.
I mean, I don't plan on dying at like 90.
I'm shooting
Now,
for
it
a
might
century.
happen. Yeah,
That's the
it
plan.
might, yeah, I would like to hit a century. Now, of course, best laid plans of mice and men. I'm not in charge of
Yeah.
that. Okay.
I have a death list of things that I must do. And that is set to complete by the time that I'm 75
Oh,
because,
okay.
I'm not pushing everything off to the last
Right.
minute, right? And I think
Yeah.
that that's where people start to get sideways with this stuff. But I
Yeah.
have the bucket list that will be done by this time, but I am hoping to hit triple digits,
Okay.
right? So
All
so
right.
it's a very interesting kind of duality, I think.
But the relationships that we have are the things that go to the future. And even that, they only go maybe 2, 3 generations down, and then our names sort of fall out of like how often do
Yeah,
you think about your great grandfather or your great great grandfather, right? Like,
not a lot.
you know, and
Yeah,
so and eventually at a certain point, the name of Hassan or the name of John is just not, we're done. Like we're out
yep,
of the right. But the things that we leave behind, the things that are permanent, the things that are important, um, are the things that we owe the future. And I don't think we can experience apathy in the face of that. But I also don't think that frenetic action is the way
oh
forward
yeah,
either.
I agree.
And so these books, these science fiction books, create a template where, unlike maybe a tragedy like King Lear, right, or a epic tale like you know War and Peace, or a set of poems like we covered the Shakespeare sonnets, love poems. We just did that, right? Or Lolita. Oh, that was a tough book. Oh yeah, Nabokov. That was hard. And by the way, I was not the one that suggested it. It was my female co-host. So like
Interesting.
I would not have touched it, but she suggested it, and we went through. You're gonna want to go listen to that episode.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting.
Yeah, it was a hard read. But what do we owe the future? Right? What do we owe people that we have not even met yet? And science fiction plays with that.
Yeah,
Science fiction plays with the ideas of what happens in the far flung future, what happens with people 50, 100 years from now who we'll never meet. Isaac Asimov talks about this, or really, this is the underpinning of iRobot. This is also the underpinning of Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, weirdly enough. This is the underpinning of do androids dream of, electric sheep? This is the underpinning of Heinlein's, almost all of Heinlein's work. In 100 years, what will we owe people because of the decisions we've made now? And that is something that I'm sitting with right now because I don't know what the answer to that is. Um, I do know that the container, for me anyway, for my mileage, the container of the Republic is the thing that I'd like to see last another 100 years, but I'm not in charge of that completely. I can do my own little contribution to that. But fundamentally, it's going to take 300 million people to like agree and walk in the same direction. And
yeah, we're
good luck
never
with
going to
that.
do that.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh, well, I think if you get more than 50%, we're going to walk in a particular direction. Like I think that's just sort of how it goes. And everybody else then just gets dragged along in the wake of it. But beyond that, I will be honest, I don't know. I don't have a clue. Um, and I don't have a clue because I'm not blown away by gee whiz technology anymore. I'm not blown away by the next technological revolution anymore. I've been through 4 technological revolutions. You have too. We've been through 4 technological revolutions. I mean, remember when blockchain was going to change everything?
hmm
Like, remember that? Yeah. Okay. Right. And now we're on to like AI that has run out of quality to run out of quality content to scrape off the top of the internet. And now the AI researchers, the wizards of smart, want to use AI content created by other AIs. What are we doing?
agreed.
Right. So I've already had, and maybe it's my jaded Gen X idea, but I've been oversold the revolution, and I've been through 4 of them already.
hmm
Go ahead, hit me up with a 5th one, maybe a 6th one. It's fine. There's things that are still going to be permanent in that, right?
Yep.
But again, what do we owe the future? What do I owe those people ahead of us? And I think Bradbury would say we owe them books. I think he would say that we owe them ideas. That's why Faber's speech is important. We owe them those three things. We owe them quality, leisure time, and then we owe them the pores of the ideas that the books have. And then we just sort of admit that we have no control over them, and we just let them go make the decisions that they're going to make, whatever those decisions are. And I don't know if that's the whole answer. I think maybe it might be a part of the answer.
I think it's so funny because we were both talking about being stuck in our writing a little bit before we turned on the recording, just kind of lamenting. And, I want to do a really good job, right? Like I'm trying to write like a quality of dialogue and content that's supposed to reflect that mentor-mentee relationship. And like when you're in that kind of flow state of conversation and there's trust, but you're being pushed, you're having perspective shifts right there in front of another human being. I think that is dope and rad. And I'm putting myself under immense pressure to do this and do a good job of it. And then I'm also trying to hold, no one's gonna care at all, man. And like not even 25 years from now, like no one might even care like the day after I put it out. You know what I'm saying? And like then do I still want to do it? Do I still think it's important if I pull that much zoom out in like, and I think that's where it meets the road. Like for what is the purpose, right? And I liked what you said about, you don't want to be reanimated later, so that way everyone can like make fun of you because the ideas will have shifted, because that's like how we do. But I was reading an article and it had one of the Beastie Boys on there, and he was talking about how like no one who's 14, 15, 16 should be listening to the Beastie Boys because like it's not for them. You know what I'm saying?
That's true. He's probably right.
Listening to brand new punk rock that's like that's causing awareness and getting political about the things that are important now. And I just really appreciated his like, I'm really glad that we've gotten to do this cool stuff, but like I'm also very aware that like we're like aging on the shelf, So I think where people go wrong is they want to make it too much about like their idea.
Yeah.
Right. And I've seen this in books. I know you've seen this in books, and we've both seen this all over LinkedIn and everything. Of like, I'm going to take this idea, I'm going to slap new labels on it, and then it's holistically mine. And like, look how great I am. And, it's like that game is not winnable, I don't think. Right. And you're just going to get your ego crushed and, find something else to do. But like, I think if you're coming from like, and this is the hardest part because like we're not even aware of the biases we hold, right? Like I love the idea a couple of years ago that there was this big thing about what was it? Is digital photography. And about Black people didn't show up well on digital photography. And it was like this big bias. And like, yeah, it is a bias. It's something we need to work on, but like it wasn't intentional. Like no one was like, hey, let's build a technology that like puts white people like in photos, but not Black people. Like it was unintentional. It needs to be fixed.
Right.
But let's not go demonize the people that were like found something that forever changed everything else after them. Right. So like I think we get way too fixated on our impactful change, like at an individual level, as opposed to like thinking to where like we could have a meaningful change. Like for me, for my sales stuff, I'm under no delusion that 100 years from now people are going to talk about Sherpa in the way that I talk about it, unless something changes and I start growing and build an empire and all this other stuff. But I also can't envision a world to where the ideas that I'm talking about won't benefit the individual.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think some people in business books are this way as well. Here's this thing I did once, and because I did it, it was epic, right? The whole Nassim Taleb stuff, right? Like, like just because you did it doesn't mean you can do it again.
Right. It's not what is it? Something about non-repeatable. I can't remember, but I know what you're talking
Yes.
about. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, we have those people. I did this once. It's going to work 1,000 times. Like, you should buy my course in my program. It's only $47.99. And here's a step up to like $9,000 and all this stuff that we're seeing all over the place. And it's like, I think if you're too ego driven around the change that you want to make, you bog yourself down to where like it's impossible to have any lasting impact if you're not Sisyphus pushing that rock up the hill. But I think if your intentions are solid, I'm not trying to teach people how to sell at the expense of other people. I'm teaching people you need to listen, you need to ask better questions, you need to have some curiosity. I hope that continues to be like needed and a best practice 150 years into the future. Now, my version of it probably doesn't need to continue the way that it is, but I'm hopeful that the foundation has some value.
I think that's a good place to stop. I'm going
Yeah.
to let John have the last word today. And all I'm going to say is, well, thank you, John, for coming on the podcast today. With that, well, we're out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.